Hello everybody, welcome back to another stream. Hope you're doing well as usual. So, yesterday, what did we watch? Oh yeah, I forgot that I actually started removing things from my lists now. So, we watched a video about the clones in gaming, so knockoffs and things like that, which was pretty entertaining. Maybe I won't do the rundown because my memory's so bad. Then after that, I goofed. Anyway, today's schedule. Uh, we had another one by Daryl Talks Games, but I can't actually remember the title of it. This is embarrassing. All right, so we have for today, We Consume Fiction Wrong by Daryl Talks Games. Then I thought we could transition into something completely different, but kind of on theme, I think, for this channel with The Art of Overanalyzing Movies by Now You See It. I'm pretty familiar with this channel. I think I've seen this video before, but if so, I may have watched it so long ago I don't fully remember. But I think this is just going to be a cogent video considering how often I feel we overanalyze the lore of FromSoft games. So maybe a little bit self-aware, but it's all good. And to just kind of go along with that, I thought it'd be a fun transition into watching my airing of Grievances with Elden Ring lore by Garrulous Goldmask with the old Frank Costanza in the thumbnail. Then after that, I have Is the Golden Order a Functioning Government? With Jake Light. So that'll be a fun, heavier lore topic we could potentially transition into there. And then following up with that, I thought we could look at Elden Ring's Gnostic Cosmology. Since we're going to be talking about the Golden Order and stuff, I feel like that'd be a pretty good transition into this video. So that's kind of what's on the docket for tonight. So hope you're all prepared. Hey Ebog, welcome into the stream. Thank you, I appreciate that. Mortis, Stella, nice to see both of you again. Hope you're doing great. Okay, so let's go ahead and watch We Consume Fiction Wrong by Daryl Talks Games.
Have you ever been watching a movie or a TV show or soaking up the plot of a game and then felt yourself grow genuinely worried about the characters? Maybe someone might not make it, or there's some terrible lingering truth over the narrative and you don't know how they'll get out of this situation. And you're in that shit, you're invested. Suddenly you're 8 years old and nothing in your life has been as important as this story beat. Then you blink and remember that that's exactly what this is. A story beat, a portion of...
So yeah, honestly, it's been an extremely long time since I felt that about a game, and that might just be due to growing up a bit more and feeling a bit more removed from the games. I do think with the inclusion of Final Fantasy VII on here, that's kind of an iconic moment in gaming, and it was an iconic game for me growing up, and a lot of games really haven't hit those same marks that 7 did. But I feel like that's just because I was much younger and more impressionable back then than I am now. So, yeah, I don't really know. I feel like this might be a statement coming from ignorance, but I feel like a lot of games aren't as narratively driven as they used to be. Or it's just kind of taken a back seat, I think, to other elements of game design, which is just kind of very frustrating. Actually, Yume Nikki, which was an independent game, was kind of crazy to me. Oh, wait, no, Undertale. Undertale is really good. That was pretty moving. Lisa could be, yeah, Lisa's probably another good one. So, wow, why is all 3 of the ones that I just mentioned super indie games? Well, that might just be more of the games that I play than anything else, but yeah, it seems like the more narratively focused games that I've played within the past 10 years or so are more indie games, which kind of makes sense for a lot of reasons, but a little bit sad. Mortis can turn off their analytical brain when he wants, so he's lucky. Nice. All right. Hey, so next, welcome back, and you tell Alexa to set an alarm, and she doesn't. Sorry you're late. It's all right, man. If you want, you could join the Discord, and I do ping. I do the notification of when I go live, about a minute or two beforehand, so that way you can potentially hop into the stream. But glad to have you here nonetheless. All right, going back to the video now.
Of this particular fiction that was crafted by humans to shift the tone of the narrative. you remember that the only reason this conflict exists is to make the eventual resolution feel that much more thrilling. And maybe for a moment you take solace in that. Okay, everything really will turn out fine because it always does, but then you look down and you're not a kid anymore. You know that these are actors, this is CGI, he isn't really in pain, and this is just a disc in your PlayStation. And obviously all these things are true, right? Like, of course, as humans with functioning brains, we can all healthily accept that this is not real. The reason kids can view stories with this level of reckless abandon is because they are still learning how to separate the real world from fiction, and they haven't seen a dozen other stories just like it before. Cool.
I do kind of wish he set that up a little bit differently, because I feel like that's kind of unintentionally patronizing towards children, and that's something that I always hated when I was a kid, when adults just patronized me. It was absolutely infuriating, and I never really ever had the sense that games or whatnot was actually different from reality. Maybe it's a little bit different now because the games are much more realistic than when I was a child, but I feel like any child who uses that as an excuse probably has some mental disabilities or some other factors where they're having issues not being able to tell truth from fiction apart. And maybe I'm just speaking from like a more privileged position where like I never really thought that there were miniature people inside of a television screen or anything like that, but I don't know. It's pretty patronizing. Hey, Teen Sith, yo, is this the Hot Take Express? Let's go. Maybe. We'll find out. Canchel doesn't know if they've ever met a kid that took games or movies that seriously. So yeah, I meant to give the qualifier. So like, I don't think any child like under 5, over 5 would really have this issue. And like 5 and under, I can give a break to. I honestly think 5 is a little bit old, but kids do develop differently. So I'm not gonna really hold it against all those little children. But anyway, hey Chris, nice to see you again. Welcome back to stream. You can get sucked into a story, but not that deep. Yeah, I'm trying to think. So a lot of the stories that I've been interested in lately are more like webtoon type manga or novels and stuff rather than anything like video games. So maybe it's just like the interface that's kind of the issue. Maybe I need to play like more narratively driven games. I liked Ghost of Tsushima. I can't speak tonight. And that it did have some surprisingly good story beats. I can't remember the lady's name, but I was honestly impressed at the depth of the characters in that game because they all had their own kind of realistic motivations for kind of doing what they were doing. Well, relatively speaking here. Maybe not so much the main character. I think his name was Jin. But anyway, going back.
But how do we prevent this from happening? Should we prevent this from happening, or is it just part of the experience now as a bitter, tired adult? And better yet, am I the only one that does this? Like sometimes I feel like I can't just enjoy media anymore without instantly analyzing every little thing on screen. Maybe it's a byproduct of being a YouTuber since I'm always looking for something to write about, but regardless, it drives me crazy. So I asked you guys about this in a poll a while back, and maybe I'm not alone. We'll circle back to that in a sec. Today, I want to talk about the 2 ways we consume media, the wide-eyed, slack-jawed, suspended disbelief kind, and the critical, pick it apart and appreciate / shit on the tiny things kind. And maybe
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the harder things to balance, I think, when you transition into content creation specifically, because you kind of always want to have that critic's eye turned on to some degree, because you can essentially make content out of anything, so your imagination is kind of always running wild with that. Maybe, it depends on like the thing that you're doing, but I feel like people who really get into content creation and try to make it like more of a professional type hobby or actual like profession, their minds they'll just keep churning because you can make a living off of it, or you get some kind of validation from it. And that's kind of one reason why I didn't want to pursue academia, because I feel like once you get to a certain point, how do I phrase this? it just kind of becomes too overly presumptuous, and that's not how I wanted to phrase it. I just kind of failed at thinking of what to say. In that, there's always been that stereotype or trope or something that like academics kind of don't really understand the real world because they're kind of lost in their own fields and whatnot, which I do think is kind of true to a degree, but tying that back into like content creation, I think there's a similar kind of pitfall where you're so hyper focused on something that you don't. Many times, I feel like some people can't see the forest for the trees because of the way they're interfacing with said forest and or trees. So, uh, what do I mean by that? Because I'm speaking in really abstract, vague terms here. Going back to my review of like Final Fantasy 16, the way that I initially played the game was, just kind of playing it like any normal game. That's typically how I do play games. But I probably also paid more attention to things that I wouldn't have really cared about if I wasn't thinking about it from a, oh, I'm trying to make a review out of this game. So maybe smaller things ended up annoying me more than they would have because I was like more mindful of them, like the crafting system, for instance, or no, Torgal is actually annoying. I'm trying to think of some like other stuff, like I don't know, like there's a lot of amazing stuff that they did with Final Fantasy 16, which I didn't talk about, but I feel like some of the amazing things that they did didn't actually really lead into a substantially improved experience. So a couple examples of that which stand out to me is I thought it was really brilliant how they kind of had an overworld map theme for like each section of the game that would transition seamlessly into a combat version of that track. So it would add a bit more intensity in a kind of natural flow of what the player was doing. And I thought that was really cool stuff, but it didn't like really make the game that much better. I mean, it was certainly a lot smoother and I appreciated it, but I don't know. I'm just kind of getting off in the weeds here. Teen Sets can never turn off Ryder Brain because she loves analyzing storytelling. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's difficult because there's a large part of me, like the critic in me comes from how something kind of makes me feel for the most part. And if something kind of breaks my suspension of disbelief, that's kind of where I go all in on the hating side of things. So that's why I really hate DS2 because it really broke my immersion in that game. So yeah. And I think that's kind of what I was trying to articulate with like Final Fantasy 16. It's a good game. It kept me fairly immersed, but it wasn't like done amazingly well. It was just kind of generic, which means it's kind of just like a generic game all around. I think it played it safe in a lot of ways, and they could have pressed the envelope to make it better. So I feel like they've kind of finally made their first step into like actual growth for that franchise by having like more adult themes included into the game, but they have a lot of work to do in terms of like having the narrative catch up to what they want to try to do with like gameplay and graphics and whatnot. It's true. Look at the world. Academics try and enter politics or the world stage for greater relevance. There's that's a really difficult topic to broach there. I'll probably just leave that one alone. Hey Mercy, welcome back to stream. Chris is just not interested in TV shows. You primarily watch science shows. You love lore videos and stories of video games. You go through spells. So yeah, some good like TV shows that I like to watch for their narratives were The Wire, Breaking Bad, Jujutsu Kaisen, since it's right on screen right here. Stuff like that. But I feel like there really haven't been a lot of games that had the same kind of narrative pull for me lately. And that was like what really drew me into games a lot more as a kid. I mean, of course, like when I was really, really young, I just played because, games were, fun, kind of arcade type things. But as I grew a little bit older, I came to appreciate the more story driven ones.
Maybe something beautiful that happens when a story uses one to bolster the other. I want to understand why for so many of us, we simply must analyze when we consume media, why in some cases it feels like we're consuming it wrong, why we struggle to just let it be what it is at face value, why it's so hard to be worked. That's a term that'll become relevant later. But real quick, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, Factor. Imagine this. You open your fridge and there is a bottle of mustard and some expired milk. It's time to go to the grocery store. But instead of making that grating little trip, you hear a knock at your door and your food for the week has been delivered to you. You see, with Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service, you can kiss grocery shopping, meal prepping, chopping, dishwashing, clean up all of that tomfoolery off of your list, and enjoy a rich variety of over 35 weekly ready-to-eat meals. Meals that meet your preferences, your lifestyle, whether that be calorie smart, vegan and veggie, protein plus, and not just for dinner. With over 55 add-ons to choose from, you can grab quick breakfast items, grab-and-go snacks, ready-to-drink cold-pressed juices, shakes, and smoothies. This cold brew latte.
I don't have a good transition to pause it, so I'm just curious, Mortis, Chris, and or anybody else in chat, what are some of your favorite story-driven games since you're talking about them?
A protein shake is divine. Should I start drinking coffee? I know I finished the backlog last month, but being able to just grab something out of the fridge that is both ready in 2 minutes and tastes freshly cooked is mind-boggling to me, and it helps me get back to what I'd like to actually be doing instead of cooking
Final
for almost
Fantasy
an hour.
Tactics?
And
Hell
you can
yeah.
tell these meals are never frozen. It feels like they just meal prepped for you.
Alright, Jesse, have you ever played Tactics Ogre? It was kind of like the OG predecessor to Final Fantasy Tactics. I streamed like one episode of it way back when. It's one of my favorite, I don't even know what you call that brand of strategy RPG other than a strategy RPG. Mass Effect, Final Fantasy, Silent Hill 2, FF7, Gone Home. Hey Andrew, welcome into stream. I don't believe I've seen your name before, or if so, I'm just really bad at remembering names. You played the remaster? Wait, Final Fantasy Tactics had another remaster on Steam? I didn't hear a damn thing about it. I'm gonna need to look into this. Scalise is more of a mechanics guy. You haven't played much outside of Skyrim, Souls games, and the Borderlands series. That's perfectly fine. I mean, enjoying the mechanics of a game is an absolutely blissful experience if it clicks for you. So I've been playing a lot more Path of Exile off stream, trying to like go through this league and navigate my own build. I kind of want to write a review about it, but I also like want to get to this point where I'm comfortable enough to like do it. So yeah, you've not played Tactics Ogre? I highly recommend it. So, oh wait, no, you're talking about, oh, the Tactics Ogre. Okay, yeah, that makes way more sense. I thought you were saying Final Fantasy Tactics. Okay, you played the remaster on Steam. You really enjoyed it. Okay, yeah, that's great. It's one of my favorite ones. Skyrim. I've heard a lot of, how do I say this? Fear and Hunger has come up quite a bit, maybe from you in chat. I might need to like look into it because I've honestly never really heard of it other than from the streams. Yeah. It's just me being a goof.
And immediately ship them all ready for you to eat, which is exactly what I need these days. If it's what you need, then head to factor75.com or click the link below and use Daryl Talks 50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. You might remember me working with HelloFresh earlier this year, and funny enough, Factor is
Triangle
now owned
Strategy
by
has an
HelloFresh,
absolutely
both of
phenomenal
which
story.
are
That's
extraordinary
great.
together.
That was a game that I was really
There's something for
interested in,
everyone.
but it just
So
kind
once
of
again, don't miss out. That's Factor75.com
came out at a really bad
or click the
time.
link
I think
below
it
and
was
use
like,
Daryl Talks
no,
50
didn't it
to
get
get
delayed with
50%
Elden
off
Ring?
your
I think I was
first
just
Factor
focusing too
box.
much on
With
Elden
that
Ring,
said,
and then I
let's
kind of
dive
forgot
right
about
back
it.
into trying not to overanalyze your consumption
New
of media.
Vegas, of course.
But first,
yeah.
we need to acknowledge that there is a certain level of analysis that must happen when we absorb anything, right? We don't just not think when we watch. Great entertainment rewards you for noticing the details and for trying to comprehend the subtleties presented. Foreshadowing works because we're smart enough to know something isn't right, which later creates a payoff in the form of a plot twist. The reason the I am your father scene lands so hard isn't just because it's unexpected, it is a moment built upon the little things, like Alec Guinness's haunted reaction when Luke asks Obi-Wan about his father. A good game rewards you for showing a thorough understanding and mastery of the mechanics. In Souls games, it's satisfying to see your stats go up and you spend souls, but it's even more satisfying when you get a knack for the combat and figure out how to beat whatever you're stuck on. You can never fully turn your brain off, so to be clear, what we're talking about here is analyzing something so deep that it breaks your immersion with it. I'm talking being so stuck on a puzzle in a game that you stop experimenting and say, okay, what do the developers want me to notice? I'm talking watching a scene like this in an anime and then thinking, yeah, I don't think they had enough time or budget to animate this part like they wanted. I'm talking being...
I haven't watched at least that season of My Hero Academia, so I don't know like if it was literally just a bunch of like slides instead of an animated sequence, but I honestly don't remember that. So I don't know what point he was trying to make with that, which is a little bit unfortunate, but okay.
That obnoxious friend that points out that Leonardo DiCaprio genuinely cut his hand in this scene and just rolled with it. And then thinking about how all of the other actors must have reacted once the director said cut instead of, just watching the movie. And frankly, I think the reason some of us struggle with this is because we are all experts. We've all seen this movie before, over and over and over. We've all watched a video about our favorite game. We've all seen hot takes on Twitter and then come up with an even hotter one.
Yeah, and this is something that I was thinking of as the video was playing, that I feel like now more than ever, people are way more media literate than in any point in history. I feel like a 5-year-old has probably experienced more diverse stories than like monarchs from hundreds of years ago. So not only that, just like the absolute difference in the storytelling present in movies between 1920 and 2020 is staggering. I feel like a lot of the older films were much more simple, and they were designed that way for a more simplistic audience. And I'm not trying to like be patronizing or patronizing to people like of those time periods, but it's just like they didn't have the type of media literacy that we do now. If you go back and look at a movie like Citizen Kane, it looks kind of benign by today's standards. However, when you compare Citizen Kane to the types of movies that came out around the same period of time, it is such a marked contrast between the type of cinematography that was used in that movie and the direction and all that stuff compared to the ones of that time period. So, for example, like in super old movies, they were like super formulaic, so you'd have an establishing shot of characters literally physically moving between set pieces, and so you'd have like the far off shot, the establishing shot, so somebody pulls up in a car, then like the medium shot, they get out of the car, then the medium shot follows them going into a building, the building cuts to another medium shot, then that person walks up to the person that they're going to speak to in that scene, then you get a cut to a close-up of like one person's face and then the other person's reaction. And so that was just something that needed to develop over time as like the artistry of cinematography improved a lot, which I guess now that I think about it, like talking about this context will really segue well into the next video with Now You See It and how we overanalyze films and whatnot. But anyway, with Citizen Kane, they really shook up the formula because they didn't bother with all of that filler of having all these superfluous establishing shots, and they just trusted that the audience would pick up, oh, this person's in a completely different location now? How did they get there? Well, it's just like giving the audience a bit of credit. And it was kind of risky at that time just because that's not how movies were filmed or edited, I guess we should say. But tying all of those ideas back into gaming, I think, is also relevant. And yeah, I guess this is we consume fiction wrong rather than games. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of lost my train of thought, and I see you guys popping off a bit. You played the new Dune games, but they're not exactly known for being story focused. It's all good, man. We're all over analyzing Ava moment. Yeah, hey Stella. You could definitely say that again. I legitimately considered making a video that compares Ava to Dark Souls and kind of using both to explain each other, but I don't know. I don't know if I want to open that can of worms. All right. Gojira 1954 is one of your favorite classic stories. That one was a lot better than I expected because I just, expected a lot more of a generic kaiju film because that's what Gojira is more or less known for. But that one really does kind of stand up fairly well to the test of time. And I still need to check out Godzilla Minus One.
Consume any piece of media, there is a fire hydrant of secondary content around it just waiting for you to go bathe in. You're bathing in some right now, but being an expert alone is not the problem. In fact, as many of you pointed out, it can actually make your time with the story that much more meaningful since you do have a deeper appreciation for it. What I want to avoid, and what I think many of you want to avoid, is this sudden mental evacuation from the story that comes from knowing too much about how it's made. Your immersion being broken because you can't unsee the smoke and mirrors that make this illusion work. Psychologists have created a proper term for being truly engrossed in a story. They call it narrative transportation. And studies on this have revealed a few things. In one 2015 article, researchers had participants watch a 20-minute film and be sure to note how many times the word gun was used. In another group, they were asked the same thing, except the film was all out of order. The scenes were not shown chronologically. And interestingly, when the film was shown in the correct order, subjects did significantly worse at noting every time the word gun was used. The hypothesis here being, when you're properly absorbed in a narrative, it becomes harder to focus on an external goal. Another study found that when participants were distracted from the story and experienced less narrative transportation, it led to reduced story-consistent beliefs and evaluations. The takeaways here are twofold. When you're truly immersed in a work of fiction, it's harder to pick it apart, and when you're distracted, it's hard to buy into. You're either really in it or almost completely out of it. It's tough to do both at once, which is why a lot of you commented on that poll that your first viewing or playthrough is typically the one where you consume, and the second and third ones are the ones where you go back and soak up all of the details, all of the things you didn't notice before.
Yeah, and that's definitely how I am with like the Souls games especially. I just kind of play through them like they're arcade games. I'll like look at the lore as I go, especially now since I'm more literate with those types of games. But with the absolute size of Elden Ring and whatnot, there was just no way I was going to retain all the information that they tried to throw at me on one playthrough. Because I remember going through Ray Lucaria and kind of learning a little bit about Ratigan, and then I guess you don't really maybe it's in the item descriptions, but anyway, I remember taking the little bit of information that I had of Ratigan and then going to meet the Turtle Pope and then kind of like finding out that he more or less abandoned Renala, and I was like, oh, okay, so he's kind of like a jerk essentially. The more I learn about him, he sounds more like a real jerk, And then later on, when I did the Corrin and Gold Mask thing and found out that Ratigan is America, that actually really threw me for a loop. That was one unexpected curveball, one spicy meatball. And that was really hard to digest, not because of like the story revelation, because for me that felt like kind of opening Pandora's box, where if one person could be another person in Elden Ring, who or what's to say that one person isn't every person in Elden Ring? You know what I mean? And so my mind went to the dark places of like all the Velka theorizing from Dark Souls 1, and I felt like, oh no, America is Velka. Like, you could literally say she's anybody at this point, or all that other stuff. And the ironic thing about that was, like, I hadn't really met Arena and Hayata yet on that playthrough. So anyway, kind of going off on a tangent just to say that I could kind of completely agree with the way that I approach games. I just chill out, do the little monkey brain the first time through, and then the second time through, I tend to be a bit more analytical or whatnot. Although that might not be entirely true. I think it just kind of like depends about the game. So the original Final Fantasy VII, I was definitely doing like a lot of vibe stuff, but the way that the game is paced, I think is kind of expertly done and is really hard to quantify. But the battles leave enough downtime between the story where you can kind of like ruminate on like what's going on and let it sink in slowly. And I'm talking about the OG Final Fantasy, but like I feel like the more action-based combat that there is, it makes it a lot more difficult to actually stay focused on the story. And at least for the new Final Fantasy VII remake, I feel like the story's a bit all over the place. And to be fair, this is like my least favorite part of the original game. So anyway, long story short, I'm extremely hyped about the beginning part of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, because that's to me when Final Fantasy VII really took off in the original game, and that's kind of like exactly where you're going to be starting in the next one. So all right, getting off track here. Teen Sith says, you find that understanding how stories work mechanically increases your ability to appreciate and immerse yourself in it. And yeah, that's another flip side of the coin, which I'm really glad you brought up. So one story that should not work by any means of like traditional media would be that of Catch-22. Or maybe you could say another kind of similar style book would be Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-5. But because they break so many conventions yet still work, that gives me a lot more appreciation for the kind of artistry that really went behind them. And those are kind of like outliers, like a lot of other books like those two don't really work for whatever reason. But yeah, I can definitely see what you mean about that. Like the more that you know, the more you can appreciate. And I think that is very true even of like the FromSoft games. So I think one positive thing about my channel and other channels like Sophie Pilbeam, Sinclair Lore, and Acer Aesthetics is that we can use other bits of knowledge to help expand or give more context about like what's going on with the games and like the text of them. So I feel like the more that you understand about Eastern religion and or like Shintoism and whatnot, and Japan in general, can help deepen one's appreciation for like the FromSoft games in particular, and or you know just honestly for like stories in general. I feel like the more you know about other cultures, the more commonalities you can find, and it becomes a little bit easier to appreciate both the similarities and differences between all of them. You love how the game drops the lore bomb on you that Radigan is America and then has exactly zero follow-up of what that means. Exactly. Catch-22 so good. Hell yeah. Alright. Going back in.
A lot of you also mentioned that you do most of your mental processing after the fact, between play sessions, between episodes, and that fits. Again, the evidence supports that it's tough to be transported at the same time you're critiquing. It's like trying to drink a soda and talk about how it tastes at the same time, which is kind of why it's a problem if our minds slip into analytical mode during a story and all at once realize that it's outside of the story now. The shift between the consuming and the analyzing is the issue here, it seems. Of course, it's a beautiful thing to be able to celebrate a work of art on two levels, right? The narrative and the craftsmanship. To be able to appreciate the quality of the animation in Jujutsu Kaisen despite the piss-poor working conditions over at MAPPA right now can in many ways make the story.
Yeah, honestly, I was a little bit surprised that they had that scene, because I definitely know that season 2. So this is only made 1 month ago. Okay, makes sense. Pretty recent film or video.
Land even harder because you can see the passion behind the people that made it. But for some of us, it might also be tough for you to re-engage with that story when suddenly your mind won't stop honing in on the animation. You can appreciate art on multiple levels, but when you can't turn it off and you start talking about the soda as you're drinking it, that's when you choke. And there was one fan base in particular that can truly never turn it off. A fan base that struggles to be worked. Imagine you flip on AEW Dynamite one evening. You don't know much about wrestling, you know it's fake, but you're bored and you've seen some clips online and it's fun in small doses, so why not? You don't know many of these wrestlers in the ring, but you recognize Kenny Omega. You have an annoying friend that talks about how great he is, how he's back with the Elite right now, and how he's a good guy again. Whatever. This match has a lot going on. Everyone here is ridiculously athletic, and it's fun to watch. A little invested, you turn up the volume, and then a chorus of boos fills the arena. I thought these were the good guys, you tell yourself. Shouldn't everyone be cheering? Why are they cheering the bad guys? You text your annoying friend. Oh, it's because they're in Chicago. Well, why would Chicago specifically be booing these three? Oh, it's because Chicago is obsessed with CM Punk. Well, why would that matter? Oh, it's because there was a lawsuit involving a backstage real-life fight between the Elite and CM Punk. Well, why did that happen? Oh, it's because CM Punk broke character in a press conference to absolutely shit on them all and in no uncertain terms denounce their legitimacy as contributors to the wrestling business. Wait, but this isn't fake? This was a real-life altercation? But why would he say all that? That is a long story, but isn't it so much more interesting than this random Wednesday night match?
I promise I'm going somewhere with this. Just give me a second.
You see, wrestling is a strange form of entertainment because it is an athletic act put on by two parties that pretend to hate each other in order to sell drama. These two are actually friends, much like these two are actually friends, but on screen, in the narrative, they play a part. They are working. Now, most of us know that wrestling is all an act nowadays, but back before this was common knowledge, this act had to span into the real world. People didn't know that this was all pretend, so wrestlers worked even when they were not on the clock. Good guys and bad guys were never to be seen together in public. For a time, Santa Claus was real, and the fans believed what they saw on TV for years. However, as the internet introduced itself,
I feel like that also goes back into what I was talking about earlier with the whole like media literacy kind of thing. And of course, it's easier to look at wrestling now and be like, oh man, that's so obviously fake. How could no one have like really caught on? I mean, of course there are people who didn't believe it, but just to give a little bit more context for those who might not know, other fighting organizations like the UFC or other MMA type things weren't exactly around back in the early days of wrestling, and boxing was kind of its own thing, and wrestling is different than boxing, right? But even with all that said, like there were still like some actual injuries that people got while wrestling, whether it be due to like fake blood or actual injuries. So there was a kind of plausible deniability of it being fake if you didn't really know any better. But anyway, yeah. It's rough as hell on the performers, absolutely. It's especially with like their contracts and whatnot. The wrestlers and professional fighters in general, I think, should be taken care of much better than they currently are. Scalise says, for people that don't know, we've known wrestling is fake since the 30s, with the first newspaper articles talking about how the story of matches were pre-written. You're not wrong, but I mean, not everybody like was actually aware of that, because I think if you just go back in this video, you see the one dude getting slammed through the fake window, and then like the woman in the audience like gasping because she thinks it's real. And that's just kind of like one of the whole things of like, even if you know a roller coaster is safe, you can still get scared from it. So yeah.
Bad guys and good guys were caught smoking weed together or hugging in the ring after TV cameras stopped rolling and the illusion slowly faded. It became a little harder for wrestlers to work people into believing the story. As the years passed, wrestlers' real personal lives, their contracts, what shows they worked for, who they had real life beef with, all quickly became just as interesting, if not more, than their scripted on TV personas. Fast forward to today, and the backstage real-life drama is often so much more intriguing than the presented story that the knowledge of said drama by the fans can hijack a live show, which is exactly what we saw on this evening. By this point, fans were so divided about who was the cause of the real-life lawsuit that they were taking sides, either Punk's side or the Elite's side, and it's obvious where Chicago stood on the situation. This is one of many examples where the fans knowing a little too much about what goes on behind the curtain can completely derail the story, not just for one single quiet moment of your consumption of it, but live as it happens on national television. Imagine having your intrusive thoughts about the show that you were watching screamed by thousands of fans in the background of that show. This is what it is to be a wrestling fan. The people are just as much a part of the show as the wrestlers themselves. If you've ever seen that excellent video Super Eyepatch Wolf dropped about Roman Reigns, or happened to watch the chorus of boos that rung out at the conclusion of a 2015 Royal Rumble when narratively they should have been cheering because technically the good guy won, you can see just how much dissonance can be created and how
I'm gonna be honest, I still have like no idea what's going on, just like the very basics. This is a little bit too out there for me. It's a live shit post, maybe. Imagine an ongoing TV show where real world events change how things happen in the universe. Yeah, I watch the news. This is why you don't read the Reddit for a video game while you're playing through it for the first time. Yeah, I feel like the people that do that are the true masochists. I like to try to stay as blind as I can and form my own opinion. That's kind of like not true. I want to know like if a game is going to be like worth my time or at least worth checking out. So like right now, Pal World is like popping off, but I kind of only ever heard about it like 2 days ago. So I'm just kind of waiting to see what people say like once the dust shakes off or whatever the idiom is. So yeah, it's really easy to be hyped for a game on its release, but then like a lot of the cracks start showing afterward. So kind of curious what people are going to be saying like a couple weeks or a month from now. You've been playing some Pal World? How is it? Pal World has Mortis concerned? Why?
difficult it is to become immersed in the presented story when the fans know, or at least think they know, what's going on behind the scenes. It's hard to be worked when everyone's thoughts on how the show should be run are interrupting the show itself. And to be fair, we're talking about two separate issues here. Being distracted from the narrative by your knowledge of game design is very different from being distracted by your knowledge of the drama around a game's production. But the former happens in wrestling too. I mean, just look at these threads I pulled from r/squared circle. The conversations here are so unbelievably high level. Talk of how often finishing moves should be kicked out of to still feel like a big deal, how wrestlers should be presented, whether or not losing clean hurts the legitimacy of a wrestler, who should be given more TV time. Threads like these are the result of fans being so in the know behind the production of their preferred form of entertainment that they practically want to make it themselves and will vehemently reject the product on the product as it's unfolding if it's going in a direction that they don't feel it should be. And I just look at this and think, there's a kid in the crowd each week who is there because he just likes Cody Rhodes. It's just that simple. And it's that simplicity that I think you lose when you consume any fiction with this higher level of comprehension. I miss when I could just play a game with the same level of wonder and blissful ignorance that I had as a child. Nostalgia hits us all differently, but maybe it's not that older games were better, that you see the past with a rose-tinted filter. Maybe it's that you didn't know any better, you know? There's a beauty.
Yeah, and I think that is a real potential that I want to explore a bit more. Because obviously I replayed Alundra like the last couple weeks and just finished that playthrough 2 days ago, and the game wasn't really worse than I remembered, but it's not like it was particularly fantastic either. And I think one of the thoughts that I had about that expressed on stream yesterday was that I think for its time it was more novel than it is now, and that novelty I think boosted it up for me. And of course, if there were a couple tweaks to the gameplay with like a couple of the parkour things, it would have been ever so slightly better for me and like probably bumped it up. But I do agree that there probably is that whole aspect of ignorance is bliss, and I think going along with ignorance is the whole idea of novelty. And a lot of games don't really do it for me anymore. It's because in many ways, like, they're derivative, or they don't offer enough new to be really captivating for me to go along for the entire journey. So I don't know. With that being said, Alundra was fun enough where I did want to go through the full journey, but I don't know. Maybe there's also a little bit of extra pressure from streaming it. I don't know. The art in Alundra aged extremely well, though. Oh yeah, absolutely. And even back then on the PS1 era, I kind of resented a lot of the push for the 3D graphics because I felt like they kind of maybe I didn't necessarily think that they looked like garbage, but I definitely felt that sprite-based games were much better looking. And I think in some ways there's no better example than the original Wild Arms, because I guess I should probably pull up some footage, or not footage, pictures, just to give a bit of context for you guys. So, this is funny. So in the original Wild Arms for the PlayStation 1, oh, that's so tiny. Okay, you had sprite-based graphics in like towns and the world map and whatnot, but then they had a kind of separate battle system where you go from having this kind of really cute art style to this. Oh, this looks really polished. What I mean, like, by polished, like, it looks like the resolution is much higher than it should have been. I wonder if it like got boosted somewhere. But this looks, well, that's just kind of sprite based. Anyway, my point is, I feel like this stuff ages much better than this stuff, and I feel like games like Alundra still retain that level of charm because they had the older style sprite based graphics. I'm trying to think if there's any like other super really pretty sprite based games that came out on like PS1. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton, but I don't know. Let me look back at chat. You love Wild Arms? Yeah, it's definitely a really good RPG. Or maybe it's not really good. Maybe that's just the nostalgia. It's definitely a cozy RPG, and I'll definitely stand by that. Skylaser says Symphony of the Night. Yeah, that's a good one. A pretty good gold standard for sprite-based work, especially Alucard and the parallax effects in the backgrounds. Yeah, knowing stuff about like things like parallax and the different layers that the devs worked with on things like the Super Nintendo, I think it allows me to appreciate those games a bit more than I would have when I was like first playing through it. And obviously the Super Nintendo is a completely different environment from the PlayStation 1, but yeah. And yeah, Teen Sith also brings up a good point that the old games art and 3D models were viewed through cathode ray televisions. So CRTs, they were not sprite comparisons. So it's kind of weird to try to talk about this because on one hand, the visual fidelity of this through this like lens of my digital monitor here makes this pop out a lot more, but that isn't necessarily a good thing because the way that these games were designed is that they took advantage of the way CRTs displayed pixels, because they weren't really pixels on these displays here, and so they're like little gaps in between each what would be a pixel, and these little gaps add in a much larger dimension of shading, which is kind of equivalent to anti-aliasing now, that actually makes them appear more realistic or more defined in a certain kind of sense. So because this is blown up, it does look a lot worse like this. So this might look better to you initially, but that's because when you're actually looking at a CRT, you're not going to notice all these like little black spots in between the pixels and whatnot. And I think this image does a better job of showing that off. So this is what it would look like on a CRT on the left side of the screen versus the full digital effect. And it's just so monstrously different that this thing looks like a freaking, you know, orc or something. It looks a hell of a lot more menacing, like it's coming out of the shadows. It's gonna get you. Same thing with the skeleton, whereas like these dudes just look a lot goofier. So, oh, maybe this one as well. So yeah, this one looks like there's a lot more shading and definition to Peach's body, but it also kind of looks like crap when it's blown up this big, this largely and whatnot. And so this is kind of like the full sprite-based effect, and it does look like garbage if you're playing on a digital screen with whether that be like OLED LCDs, when you're looking at these kind of sprites and applying filters like this, like TV filters and whatnot, and scan lines, because they don't actually really mimic the effect of what would happen on a CRT. So this is kind of just crazy to me. CRT looks amazing, yeah, and so it's just kind of an older technology. See, I almost think like this looks better on the right, but there's a certain kind of depth to the CRT image that can be really desirable. And another thing about LCDs in particular is that there's always a backlight, so it makes things like brighter than they would have been, which is why this dude looks so freaking orange as opposed to like this really kind of dark brown that like fades into the shadows. And like you can see the actual bottom of the skeleton shield here, where it's kind of just more implied on the CRT. I wonder if there's the one that has like the picture of Zero from Mega Man. That's really good. Yeah, so like his nose and whatnot looks really pointed, whereas like this looks like straight anime almost, you know? So it just depends. Anyway, getting off topic with that. Scaleezy says, part of why Nintendo has been so good is they focused on mastering established technology versus being mediocre with cutting edge stuff. It also saves money. Yeah, exactly. And so I've been a long time proponent of art style over graphics, and I feel like a lot of devs have conflated the two. 60 FPS looks awful on film compared to about 32 FPS. Is that true? I thought like 32 is like the terrible, awful, what's it called? The frame effect, where like it makes things look like soap operas? Or is that like 40? Anyway, all right, I'm gonna go back to the video now. Or not?
And a fragility to those days that we can't get back. Pro wrestling fans are a fascinating case study, but I think they are an extreme manifestation of what a great many of us become after years of enjoying the art we love. The more we consume, the more we pursue, and the more we understand about the creation behind our favorite things. Long gone are the days where we played a game through uneducated eyes. Everyone.
Alright, this is gonna bother me if I don't bring it up, but Teen Sith asked, well, she didn't really ask. She just said, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know if there's a really good video that I can think of offhand. Soap opera TV effect. So there's a certain type of frame rate and a setting on many TVs, which... What the hell? Where's this coming from? What is even on this page to do that?
In Inglourious Basterds, Quentin Tarantino wrote a funny...
Oh, that doesn't make sense. All right, I'll get to you later. What was I going to say? Yeah, the TV effect is that TVs now will insert frames into older video formats. So if most films are shot at 24 frames per second, the TV hertz will like make an AI image to kind of smooth the frame rate to match like the hertz of the television. So you get 24 frames per second, but the TV will start adding up to like 40. So whatever the math is, so it should like insert 16 frames or something like that. And it just causes a lot of things to look really wonky.
I repeat, we are under...
So this, you'd probably need like a really good eye for it, but it just looks wrong.
I repeat, we are under
Like, he's too fast and looks unnatural, and this is part of a soap opera effect because soap operas were filmed at a higher frame rate than movies, and so part of the reason this looks so wrong is because like the frames are being inserted that aren't actually there, so it looks very unnatural and more like a soap opera. So anyway, that's all I'll show of that, and I just wanted to bring that up to light in case anybody else didn't know about that. Interpolation, yeah. That effect, you've never heard of it referred to as a soap opera effect. I forget what it's actually called, and I know there's so many TV settings that have different names for it that it doesn't really have a standard name. But okay. Some movies are notable for speeding up and slowing FPS as an artistic technique. Yeah, I've definitely done that on some of my videos to try to match the kind of run times of what I'm talking about. Yeah, it looks like they're moving how one slides on ice. That's a good way to describe it. A lot of complaints of movies being too dark is probably related to your display settings. You're not going to convince me that the last season of Game of Thrones wasn't too dark, Teen Sith. Nice try. Looks really wrong with animation in particular. Really? I guess I don't really watch enough of... Yeah, I don't really use a TV. I just kind of use monitors, to be honest.
One is a game design guru now. Thanks to wonderful channels like these, the literacy for game development is better. The literacy behind story structure and character development and cinematography is better. And none of these things are inherently bad, but a strange consequence of them is that sometimes the how it's made distracts from what is made. With that literacy under your belt, you can't unsee things like how certain items are painted in order to make it obvious to the player what items are interactable so that they don't meander around trying to break everything. You can't avoid how predictable certain narratives become because you are way too quick to pick up on foreshadowing. You can't really believe that Dr. House isn't any real danger in this scene because he's the main character. They simply cannot kill him off his own show in the middle of the season. You can't fully enjoy a wrestling match without trying to figure out how they let this guy lose without making him look weak, because there's no way they're letting the championship change hands on the weekly show and not on a pay-per-view. And I think it's for those reasons that the media that really captures our imagination these days are the ones that don't rely on our established understanding and in fact use that against us. Meta-narratives in gaming take over the internet because we haven't seen this movie before. In Undertale, we assume we know what these figures mean. In One Shot, we assume that we can just close the game like we can close any other game. In Control...
Yeah, I think the Undertale use of the stats is very brilliantly done, and I won't say more in case you don't know what that's about, but anyway.
We assume we know how credits and bad endings work. In Doki Doki, we assume that it's a certain genre, when in fact... one of these days, I'm going to stop milking this game for examples. In the Stanley Parable, I don't even know where to start with this one. And it's not just meta-narratives. I made an entire video about how I genuinely could not enjoy Outer Wilds until I stopped viewing it with video game literacy glasses. The title Outer Wilds is not a video game was not meant as disrespect, it was meant as a compliment because it completely forces you to stop relying on what you think you know about video games to progress and enjoy it.
I'm going to be honest, for the life of me, cannot tell you what the Outer Wilds is about, and I constantly confuse it with the other Bethesda Fallout knockoff game, which I thought was titled The Outer Wilds, but something like that. I don't remember. I would need to look it up. So, Outer Wilds is probably your favorite game of all time? Interesting. Yeah, I've heard really good things about it, but in my head, whenever I hear Outer Wilds, I think of the other not Fallout game, if that makes sense. So I just couldn't really bring myself to look into it. If he mentions Ludo narrative, dissonance and harmony, we all have to drink. Yeah, maybe. And also, welcome back to the stream, Peanut Bobo, and nice to see you again, howdy. Stonehenge.
I had never seen anything quite like it before. I briefly mentioned this in the back.
Outer Worlds. Yeah, those are the same game to me, mentally speaking. Thanks. Yeah. Okay.
Backlog video, but Hellblade's ending also breaks an assumption that you have about final bosses in video games to make its point, and I will never forget that one. So many times we aren't fooled for a second that a main character isn't in any real danger when their peril is threatened. But any confidence we had that the same plot armor existed in Game of Thrones is completely tossed out within the first few seasons. If this show threatened to kill someone off, you believed it because it showed you that no one was safe, which not only kept people historically invested, it hurt people. It hurt people bad. I'm going through the same thing with Jujutsu Kaisen right now. This is why stories that take risks work, because they inherently subvert what we think we know about what writers and developers are doing. It's what
Right, and with the Game of Thrones thing, I think for the earlier seasons at least, it built up a kind of believability to it because the deaths of the characters weren't done without any rhyme or reason. They're often very well alluded to or foreshadowed. Maybe foreshadowed isn't the best word, but I mean, there was enough buildup where you could see it coming. But as Daryl has been like kind of mentioning, it's just like, oh, you don't really think the protagonist is in danger until they're actually in danger and bad stuff happens. So I think Game of Thrones gets a pass because not because they killed off the main character, because there have been other stories that have done that, but those kind of stories were more failures for other reasons. And it's kind of hard to dissect why Game of Thrones is the one that got away with it, as they say. Oh, it's a Moai from Easter Island? Henge. Yeah, that's right, you got me.
What makes pro wrestling such a uniquely fascinating form of entertainment, because it can do this shit in real time. Writers can, on the fly, realize that the real-life drama has captured everyone's attention, and then turn that controversy into a part of the on-screen fictional narrative. Here is a segment where MJF speaks on national TV, but he isn't addressing the wrestler that he's going to fight next week as part of the show. He's talking directly to his boss, Tony Khan, about how poorly he feels he's been treated as a talent and how underpaid he feels he is.
Don't ask him to reach into his pockets and pay the man who's been busting his ass for him since day one. Make sure he hoards all that money so he can give it to all the new ex-WWE guys he keeps bringing in.
So, if you're a fan that is aware of the
Now I'm like, it's got my wheels spinning. I'm like, oh man, is this scripted? Because that's like the really big Galaxy Brain play. Because if even that's scripted to just work up the fans, that would just be like, you know, the Megamind play right there. He's the one that gave the middle finger to a 12-year-old at a fan event. I mean, if he's playing the heel, he's doing a good job, right?
real world controversy, you watch this and think, wait, is this for real? What exactly am I watching right now? Is this a work or a shoot? Especially after they cut his mic and don't acknowledge his existence after they come back from commercial or for weeks afterwards. Wrestling can immerse you by taking what has broken your immersion and then making it a part of the story. It would be like if you hesitantly booted up Hogwarts Legacy and then one of the characters just turned to the camera and started bashing J.K. Rowling for her horrendous behavior and how they're just disgusted that they have to be in this game now, and then that initiated a side quest revolving around the controversy. I almost had a stroke trying to write that because no other form of media can do this quite like pro wrestling can. It is extremely tough to take that distracting conversation about a narrative and weave it into the narrative, but it is most certainly one way to resuspend your disbelief. So what do we make of all this? Because as much as I have taken the time to carefully articulate all of the ways our knowledge of how the sausage is made can distract us from enjoying the sausage, I still don't have a fix to my problem. Not every form of media is going to be that brilliant or innovative or brutal, and there will always be stories that are just sort of standard that do enough to make you feel something without actively trying to throw you off what you think you know about its structure, and that is absolutely not a bad thing. The reason this whole immersion breaking analysis conundrum is an issue for me personally might be because I'm a YouTuber, it might be because I'm a wrestling fan, it might be because I'm both. And I didn't want to make the video all about this because it would have been such a drag to write about, but I think nowadays with so many complex opinions about media circling around, a great many of us both feel like it's normal to consume media on this higher level and feel as though we should be contributing to the conversation on a higher level.
And that's so I'm trying to like segue without using the types of segues that I use all the time, but with the whole idea of consuming fiction wrong or being unable to enjoy it, I think raises the question of how are you consuming your media. And obviously with Daryl talking about things from a content creation perspective and kind of always having that analytical brain on, that gives us a very good clue as to the way that he's approaching things. But the question is that how everybody approaches things? And of course that's like a little bit reductive, and I don't think he's trying to say that whatsoever. But what I'm trying to get at is he applying too high of standards to things that don't necessarily, I don't want to say like deserve them, but are his standards too high because of the lens he's looking through? I think that's possible. And I think if you go into a Marvel movie expecting, I don't know, what's a movie that's like won a ridiculous amount of awards? If you go into like a Marvel movie and expect something like Parasite or Everything Everywhere All at Once, you might have a little bit of a whiplash in how they may or may not meet your expectations, you know? So is Daryl kind of doing that equivalent type of thing to the other forms of media that he's consuming? I think it's possible that we might just have too high standards. And so do we need to just kind of lower our standards to be able to enjoy what's in front of us? Maybe. And if so, where do those standards come from? I do think there could be that whole tie-in of like media literacy that we've been talking about throughout the stream so far.
The reason there are so many shit takes and what's an opinion that'll have you like this threads floating around is because so damn many of us now are just, frankly, fiction snobs. It's not enough to just like something anymore. You have to be able to defend it in the, but is it actually good conversation, in the, where does it rank conversation, in the...
Complaining about another person having standards too high is a cell phone, not gonna lie. I almost sounded like I said cell phone. Cell phone. No. Anyway, yeah, it might be a cell phone. I don't really care, to be honest. And I'm speaking a bit more generally because I feel like a little bit of kinship to Daryl in some regard, where I feel like my own standards might be too high and could get in the way of something that I would enjoy otherwise if I didn't have too high of expectations for some things. So, if I hadn't played any other Final Fantasies and I played Final Fantasy 16, would I think it's a better game than it is? Maybe. I think that's a possibility. But by that same token, I also can't entirely delete my previous life history and play Final Fantasy 16 without the lens that I currently do have. Stella says, if you go into everything with no expectations, you don't set yourself up for inevitable disappointment. To a degree, you are correct. However, that's also a little bit of an impossible order just because nobody is truly a blank slate when they go into something. They all have their own kind of history, whether that be like baggage that they bring with them or certain types of expectations. Even not having an expectation of something can lead to certain expectations of things. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense the way that I phrased it on its own, but Um, trying to think of a good way of explaining that. So I think by not having an expectation to begin with, it might imply a certain degree of openness to an experience versus being closed off to a new experience, which could also color your perception of said experience. People assume a lot about what's going to happen in a story. Oh yeah, it's absolutely human nature. We're pattern recognition based. The more you know about the series, about the stories, the more accurately you can predict them, which can be fun. And I'm assuming you're gonna say more. Part of the issue, Scalise says, is people subconsciously go, "I like this, therefore it's good." I mean, there's it's totally understandable why people would do that. A lot of people would benefit from having a growth moment of it's okay to like things that aren't good. And I think that's also a fair point. Like I said yesterday on stream, like the Dynasty Warrior games for me were like a bit of a guilty pleasure. Like I don't necessarily think they're good. I don't think they're like great games that are going to suck in everybody and make them want to play it. But for me, they're just kind of like this fun little thing that I can do to pass the time if I'm ever inclined to just defeat 1,000 soldiers in the course of like 10 minutes and whatnot. You were probably going to say more, but don't remember any of it. Okay, I didn't want to fill it in for you and or step on your toes because, trying to keep up with typing compared to me speaking is just a little bit of a nightmare. So I think, as you were saying, stories can be, you were saying that stories can be more accurately predicted, which can be fun. But I think conversely, if you're able to predict what goes on in a story, it can end up feeling boring or derivative. And so if you know where this is going, then why continue watching it is one thing that can be brought up pretty often. And so that's kind of why we disdain a lot of clones and or knockoffs, because there's less novelty associated with them. So, yeah. Morta says, you like DS2, but you don't think it's good? I apologize. I feel like I may have swayed your opinion over time. And then Jesse brings up the excellent point of what is good, though, also. And that is always something that is very fascinating to try to talk about because, in English at least, the word good brings a lot of baggage with it because we talk about goodness as it relates to ethics, as well as quality, amongst all these other types of things, which are just kind of eluding me right now. And so to say that something is good can inadvertently mean good in a definition that isn't the type of good that you're talking about. So it becomes this real quagmire of trying to support your claims without bringing in all of that other baggage as well. Teen Sith would rather have a well-executed, predictable story than a poorly executed novelty. And I think that's a very fair sentiment to have. I don't think novelty is like the be-all, end-all of storytelling or enjoying something. But then the question, I think, becomes how many times are you comfortable re-seeing like the same story over and over? For some people, like that answer is like always. They'd always watch something over and over, even if it's a derivative work. So I feel like in many ways the Lifetime movie network channel, I'm assuming in the past at least, like they just had on like a bunch of, can you call them romantic comedies? Or they just be romance movies? I don't know. Anyway, they just had a very distinct type of show / movie that they would air all the freaking time, and their audience loved it, and that was great for them, which is, awesome. But that doesn't mean it like works for everybody all the time. Vonnegut wrote something up outlining only 7 types of story. Yeah, and a lot of people have done that as well. I know Campbell has as well, and I know you're not a fan of Campbell, if I'm remembering correctly. It might have been Vonnegut. It wouldn't surprise me if he did. Originality has given way too much importance in analysis, in your opinion? I'm curious to hear more about that. For Jesse, when it comes to consuming media, the bar for good is whether or not it made you feel something you wanted to feel. That's a pretty good definition, I think. You don't think you can really fully classify story, Mortis? Yeah, I would also agree with that, because I feel like the idea of a story is that it has to influence a subject, and that doesn't necessarily mean there needs to be an object of the story for the subject to appreciate that story. So what the hell am I talking about? So, for example, if I look at something random in the world, and let's say like a bird flies by and lands on a branch, and it flies away, but then I start laughing hysterically, to other people that might make no sense whatsoever. But for me, what if I have a memory of like a bird pooping on a friend, and that bird that landed on that branch just kind of reminded me of that event in the past? There's a kind of story associated with that event, but there is no real like story there. So I think in some ways stories don't necessarily have to be like narratives, perhaps. I don't know like a good way to talk about this. Teen Sith says, a lot of art people will say they steal all their ideas. You have an original fantasy thing cooking that comes from a world building exercise to fix the things that you hate most about Harry Potter. Like it was just a spreadsheet. Yeah, and I think that's another fair thing as well. That it's a little bit unfortunate you weren't here in yesterday's stream, as far as I'm aware, because we looked at a video where we talked about like clones and gaming saving it, and how innovation is a way where a clone can kind of outscale the original thing that they were based on. And wasn't so, value judgments aside, I don't know how good either of these two pieces of work truly are, so don't get like stuck on the details here. But from my knowledge, I believe like what's it called? Damn it, 50 Shades of Grey was based off of Twilight fan fiction originally, which anyway, yeah, I guess that kind of like doesn't work with my argument that like the original can be outdone by its competition. Because I don't know. That's just a bad example on my part. But anyway, what's another one where a clone is done better than the original? Okay, this example doesn't exactly work, but as I mentioned yesterday on stream, like you can make the argument that Dark Souls is a Demon Souls clone that does better than the original, which it's a little bit unfair, but I think there's kind of like a kernel of truth to it. Anyway. Yeah, 50 Shades is a fanfic. So yeah, I think there is validity in having something that you want to get tweaked to be a little bit better for your tastes, which can work in a similar space yet operate independently at the same time. So maybe a better example of this would be something more like Mr. Robot, and the thing that it was kind of directly inspired by. I don't want to give it away, because giving it away gives it away, in case anybody doesn't know. So, also you could say like, oh yeah, another one would be, I might make some people angry for saying it, but Game of Thrones was definitely inspired by Lord of the Rings, but George's issue with Lord of the Rings was that it was too safe because Gandalf does come back rather than staying down when he's down and whatnot. So, well, I'm not trying to say like Game of Thrones is better. At least for a time, it was like the most popular franchise on Earth. Maybe, that might be stretching it. Popular novel series? I don't know. But anyway, for a brief period of time, it was like the most popular thing, more so than Lords of the Ring, is kind of what I'm trying to get across. So, yeah, there's, even though like Game of Thrones isn't particularly novel in many ways, it's innovative enough where it was able to kind of carve out its own niche. Yeah. Several newer books right now were originally Raylo fiction, and you wish you were kidding. Oh no. And Teen Sith says one professor you had said it can be really worthwhile to reframe something as effective and ineffective instead of good and bad. I can see the point to that, and I think good and bad aren't great descriptors on their own anyway, but I'm not entirely sure if effective or ineffective are better or worse, and I would want to think about that a bit more. Okay. Enough tangents for now. Let's go back to the last bit of the video. And thanks for all
But does
the
it hold
comments.
up conversation? And I don't want to demonize this flow of thought. People have these discussions because they're fun. Hell, it's part of the reason I stay in business. But again, a strange byproduct of it is that sometimes I think a lot of us struggle to just play, watch, and enjoy without doing anything more than that. I miss the simplicity that comes with liking something because you like it. All that to say, I still have no clue how to fix this. There was no psych study I found that showed that you could just unknow what you know so that what you know is less distracting when you're trying to stay immersed. But if this is a problem for you, I do think that it might be at least a little helpful to just not give a damn what other people think should be happening in a narrative.
So this can potentially be, I don't want to say like fixed, but it can be addressed somewhat depending on one's beliefs in Eastern mythology through the art of meditation, where one of the goals of meditation is mindfulness, but also presence and awareness is kind of tantamount to that whole experience. So the idea of awareness is really difficult to talk about in this context because for many people, it's very difficult for them to be aware of their mental state or their physiological state while they're actively participating in something. And so they need a lot of training in mindfulness and awareness to kind of be more comfortable doing that. And to say something like mindfulness and awareness still encapsulates the idea of having that like metacognitive brain on, but some forms of meditation, so not like all meditation, seeks to kind of turn off the metacognitive part and focus more on being and awareness through being rather than awareness through thought, which might be something that Daryl would want to look into. I'm sorry if I'm not articulating this particularly well, because I feel like I'm afraid that you might need to have like a certain amount of familiarity to understand what I mean. Hopefully I'm being clear enough for you guys in chat. Hey, Kapenda, nice to see you again. This vid's showing some key scenes from Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2. Yeah, luckily you watched it already. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised to see those in here as well. Mortis said, in their special needs program, he had to learn mindfulness, and it's helped a lot speaking as someone on the spectrum. And yeah, I think mindfulness and awareness is just kind of a good thing to have in general, but I think one of the most difficult aspects of trying to get on the whole hippie Eastern mindset train of thought there is that for many forms or arguments for like the idea of meditation or the idea of religion or like living one's life a certain way, it seems to phrase a lot of these things in a kind of vacuum, in that being an awareness is kind of like a return to what I would almost call like an animal state, where you're not really thinking about the world, you're just kind of existing within it and being, which is difficult in and of itself to do, but I think it really just kind of gets thrown out the window when somebody has to deal with like a more modern problem. And what I mean by like a modern problem could be something as benign as like going to school and like literally like being given like this set of rules to navigate, worksheets and stuff like that. I think stuff like modern based society really, I don't want to say like contradicts like the super Eastern Buddhist stuff, but it kind of does to some degree. Like I think Dark Souls and Elden Ring kind of hint at it sometimes with the whole like stuff with like the misbegotten, where and the beasts, like where civilization took hold, their wildness slipped away from them. I think to kind of understand the mindfulness that's present, what I'm talking about is kind of like a return to a monk state, monk with an E, but I guess it works as a pun as well, where you just kind of like want to turn off the meta-analysis part of your brain and just kind of experience life as you're experiencing it, which I think is very difficult to do while you're playing a game, particularly a game where you like actually need to actively think about it. Like in many ways, like thought is the bane of being in this kind of framework. And of course, I should probably make it very clear that I'm like not speaking from like a professional perspective or anything, or like an actual trained monk or a trained Buddhist, but this has just kind of been my take on things. So sorry to like make this kind of weird turn in the direction of the video and the content, but I don't know. Hopefully it's been insightful to some degree.
Contribute to these conversations a little less, and to remember that the art you like best is best because it's not a competition, and you don't have to show your work when you think something is profound.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Daryl here. Just wanted to pop in at the end of the year on the last video. I always like to just sort of come on real quick and say thank you so much for making this job so much fun. It's been 6 years now. This is the 6th year of me doing this, and I'm just very excited to, number one, be done with the backlog. Number two, be at 500,000 subscribers, and number three, finally have a break. I'm tired. I'm ready to drink some eggnog and hang out and be with the family, and I hope that you're excited to do the same. I hope that you have a fantastic holiday season, and again, I just want to thank you so much for watching the videos this year, for being here, for commenting, do all the things that you do. You guys are simply the best, and I really thank you so much for making this so much fun for me, because I truly enjoy doing this, even if I am very tired right now. As always, if you like what you see here, I do have a Patreon that you can feel free to go and support. There's lots of bonus content. I do some very small, cozy streams there. I also do blooper reels, and some of weekly input, creative input, things like that, voting for thumbnails. It's all there. You also get to see your name. There should be names. you might get to be on screen. You also might get to be a featured patron. This month's featured patrons, everybody. Give it up for Spunky Siren, Inno, Chris22, Mal_K. We have J Hamilton Roque. Did I say that right? J Hamilton Roque, Connor M, Dullahan, and Deadbeat Deborah. Thanks, Deborah. But yeah, that's going to be it for me, guys. Just want to say thank you again so much. 6 years, it's been incredible. Here's to 12. Here's to 1 million. You guys are simply the best. So, happy holidays.
What is that a remix of? It's kind of driving me crazy. Is it a Zelda song or is it Chrono Trigger? Anyway, yeah, hold on.
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year.
Carol of the Bells. Oh, wow.
Enjoy that
He's
shit.
having a
And as
moment,
always, have yourself a damn good one.
I guess it is, but there is like this one Zelda song, I think Link to the Past, that it really reminds me of. I need to think about it. Okay, so Kapenda had said, that's an interesting point. Your cousin is very into meditation and he goes to retreats and such, and he will often tell you that it only takes a few days being back in the real world for him to lose some of his mindfulness that he gained in his time there. So you think I'm onto something? And yeah, that's kind of like one of those things where I feel like somebody might need to experience it to kind of grasp what I'm saying a bit more intuitively than just like me talking about it abstractly. But I think part of what makes traditions like Buddhism or certain sects of like Hinduism or just like the type of ascetic lifestyle work so well is that they cloister themselves away from society, and they're more focused on the actual physical aspects of living day to day, more so than a lot of the other stuff that comes with actual societal based living. So things like paying bills, mortgages. I don't want to say cooking because there is kind of like an overlap, but the more logistic side of life in terms of like figuring out where your food is coming from if you're not growing it yourself and whatnot. So going to the store, purchasing it, having to deal with actual numbers and receipts and stuff rather than just focusing on what you have and making do with what you have with a very simple rustic lifestyle. So this isn't like a condemnation of either way of living, but I do think there is just a kind of weird incompatibility with that kind of a simple ascetic lifestyle and living in society. Go figure, right? Teen says, your brain goes too fast for meditation to do much, to be honest. A therapist attempted to teach you. Yeah, I can totally understand where you're coming from with that. I personally think that what is taught about meditation is very counterproductive for a lot of people because generally speaking, a lot of what I've heard about like what meditation is supposed to be is a point where you like think about nothing essentially, which is one of like the worst ways that I think you could try to explain what meditation is to somebody. And one of the things that I've learned a bit more recently in a more holistic way is that there are actually different forms of meditation, and some forms of meditation can actually just be entirely physiologically based. So if you're focusing on your breathing, there is some science to support that certain types of breathing styles can help regulate like different parts of your I don't know enough about the science to like say it confidently, but like your limbic system, things like that. And I think that aspect of meditation could probably be opened up a bit more for exploration and seeing like if that has a good effect on people. But you know, setting that stuff aside, I think like the general trend of thought behind like meditation is like, oh, you want to clear your mind, and through clearing your mind you'll be able to just kind of enter this state where you kind of get a kind of a heightened awareness. But I feel like that puts way too much pressure on what meditation could be or is for some people. So anyway, meditation, it can be whatever you want to make of it. You don't have to clear your mind. Honestly, if you just lie in bed and think about whatever happened to you throughout the week and just kind of ruminate on those events, that is a form of meditation that isn't necessarily dependent on invoking a certain frame of mind. But I don't think that's going to be classified as a form of meditation by many people, even though it is very similar to certain meditative states. But anyway, that's not too important. So I think one issue with the whole meditation is it's not one size fits all, and there's many different forms of meditation, which I don't know enough about to really like offer better advice, other than you don't necessarily have to think of nothing or like think of your mind being a crystal. You don't necessarily just have to sit there and let the thoughts pass through you, like being aware of the thoughts and then letting them go. There's a lot of other things that can be done to go hand in hand with meditation that isn't necessarily the stereotypical idea of meditation. So, like I was mentioning a moment ago with the physiological stuff, just taking the moment to lie or sit down in a relaxed, comfortable position, being aware of how your body is actually feeling, and being aware of any changes in your body, whether that be like long term, so like maybe like you've been feeling some more pain in your back, but just taking the moment to assess your actual physical condition can be a lot of good for a lot of people. Taking the moment to breathe and relax can be a lot of good for a lot of people. One of the reasons why smoking is almost impossible for a large number of people to give up is because in many ways it is very similar to meditation, because it's focused on a kind of ritualistic breathing exercise, whether or not it's done consciously or subconsciously. So for a lot of smokers, one of the best ways to rehabilitate them away from the habit is to supplement it? Supplicate? No. Anyway, maybe to sublimate is to replace the cigarette breathing stuff with another like form of breath exercises in conjunction with other anti-tobacco practices, whether or not that means like eating chocolate if you're feeling craving, or like using nicotine patches. Anyway, kind of going off in the tangents there. And Special Noob says, whenever you try and meditate, you fall asleep. And there's nothing wrong with that either, unless you have other pressing things you need to do throughout your day. Maybe it's different for people who don't have things like ADHD. Yes and no. I think, like I was saying before, substitute, yeah, that might be the better word, is that I definitely think that ADHD would be a big thing that would impede the whole idea of meditation. But I think part of that is because of the way that meditation has been traditionally framed. And I think ADHD and folks that have it can still meditate, but it's just different from the traditional style. Yeah, you got to replace one addiction with a healthier one. Okay, so that was a good video by Daryl Talks Games. I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat for you guys if you want to give him a like and or a sub if you have not. I definitely talked about this way more than I expected I would, so maybe that's a good thing, but I'm probably not going to be able to get to all the videos on the list for today. Since it said, it was kind of being taught to you as the letting the thoughts flow without judgment sort of mindfulness. So I think you can still keep the judgment in there, and a form of meditation can be letting those thoughts come into your mind and playing with them and seeing where they go. And then you can kind of build off that. So like, why did this thought come up in your mind? And you can kind of explore that a bit more. And so even though you're not doing the whole like physiological thing of like focusing on the autosomatic stuff of like breathing and not doing that stuff manually, you can still gain a lot from meditations. Like, okay, so I thought of this time earlier in the week where this weird dude looked at me strangely in the store. Why am I thinking about this? Was there something in the way that he looked at me? Was it just me like imagining things? And so like, in either case, why am I thinking about it? It must have bothered me on some level. Why is that? So you could play with that. And that's kind of like anathema, I think, to what could have been presented in other forms of like meditation where like, no, you just have this thought and then you let it go. I think for people with ADHD, letting go is the hard part. And telling somebody with ADHD to let go is more like saying, like, hold on for dear life. They cannot do it. They absolutely cannot do it. They'll just end up fixating on it. So, for somebody with ADHD, I think the whole idea is to take it to its most logical conclusion and to its furthest extent until they get tired of it, and then they will naturally let go of it, because that's just kind of how they are. They just kind of float adrift, and they latch onto things, and then they let go, and then they float and are adrift. And I think that floating and adrift part is kind of where you get your real meditation from. But for somebody with ADHD, you need to first latch onto something to be able to let go. And so the whole aspect of meditation, I think, is kind of backwards for ADHD folk, because meditation typically is taught as like, first you need to let go and then you stay there. That just does not work for somebody with ADHD for that form of meditation, in my opinion. Hey, you, welcome into the stream. Nice to see you again. Ask Next said, the way you were taught was just focusing on the breath. If you think, so what? Just let it happen. And like I said, there are very different forms of meditation. It is not one size fits all. And so that's kind of why I'm just trying to bring up some of this other stuff. ADD and ADHD are the same thing. Technically, they are not. And now the whole discourse is trying to come up with a different term for ADD, because ADD is essentially the same as ADHD without the hyperactivity, and it does have actual different physiological effects on its sufferers in ways that I'm not qualified to talk about. Did you miss any hot takes? Were our takes that hot? I'm not sure. Anyway, okay. So that was a good video. I've gone ahead and linked it in the chat if you want to give him a like. I subbed to him yesterday after his other video. So now we'll transition into a kind of similar topic, I believe, with The Art of Overanalyzing Movies by Now You See It, one of my favorite YouTube channels. All right. Maybe I should read this. Author. The curtains were blue. English teacher. The curtains represent his immense depression and his lack of will to carry on. And then what the author meant, the curtains were frickin' blue.
In Inglourious Basterds, Quentin
That's really
Tarantino
quiet.
wrote a funny sequence where a German officer mixes up the story of King Kong with the story of the American slave trade. Every question he
Let me know if I need to turn up the volume, because the music was way louder than the voice.
asks has the same answer for both.
Auf der Schiffsreise lag ich deinen Ketten.
Ja,
Als ich in Amerika ankam, wurde ich deinen Ketten zur Schau gestellt.
ja.
Bin ich die Geschichte des Negers in Amerika?
Nein.
Also dann muss ich King Kong sagen.
Ah,
The German officer and intern Tarantino clearly think King Kong is an allegory for the slave trade, yet the creators of King Kong have repeatedly denied this interpretation of the movie, saying there are no hidden meanings. It's just a story to them. This disconnect between creator and audience
right, I'll turn it
brings
up
to
a little
light
bit.
one of the most important questions in film discussion. Is an interpretation still valid if it's not what the artist intended? The answer has broad implications for analyzing art. If meaning is objective, then discussion becomes much more narrow. Critics must take the artist's word as law and only look for meanings that the artist consciously intended. On the other hand, if meaning is subjective, a critic can find any message they want in a film. And that means anybody can throw around any theory they want. English teachers can overanalyze curtains, no matter what the artist says. So where is the line? Let's have a look at how artists talk about and make their movies to figure out the best mindset towards analyzing and overanalyzing film. Some directors do clearly state their intentions for a movie. In a rare interview from the Coen brothers, they mention that The Big Lebowski is based on noir detective novels from the 30s and 40s, but with a humorous twist. It has the main character in over his head, a complicated and morally ambiguous narrative, and an unreliable supporting cast. But instead of smoking cigarettes like most noir heroes, he smokes marijuana, one of the several humorous twists on the conventional detective stereotypes. For deeper movies,
And that's kind of an interesting way to frame this movie in particular, because we were talking a lot about derivative works and knockoffs or innovations on tried and true formulas. So I think looking at The Big Lebowski as kind of one of the shining examples of how you can have a different twist on an old classic formula really does shine a bright light on how knockoffs aren't necessarily bad things if they're done in a kind of a genuine way, perhaps. Maybe genuine way isn't like the best way to phrase it. Anyway.
the idea is many directors create a movie with an idea in mind. But not only will directors hide the meaning of their movies, they may even film the movie deceptively. In American Psycho, director Mary Herron had William Dafoe portray his character in 3 different ways. The first way, the character thinks Patrick Bateman killed Paul Allen.
I just wanted to know if you know.
The second, he thinks he didn't do it.
People just disappear.
And the third, he's unsure.
To think that one of his friends killed him for no reason whatsoever would be too ridiculous.
Isn't that right, Patrick?
Heron edited these portrayals together to have the character constantly switch his opinion of Bateman between takes. The choice creates a movie full of uncertainty, and it adds to the frenzied, toxic male dominance within the movie. Ang Lee.
And I really like talking about this after the last video as well, because Daryl was talking about the whole idea of meta-knowledge informing your understanding of a story. And I think having this meta-knowledge that they used differing takes by Willem Dafoe to just kind of make the audience feel a bit more uneasy can actually help us appreciate the film a bit more. Because if you didn't necessarily have the knowledge that that's what they did with intent, the film might just feel oddly ominous to the person, and they couldn't necessarily put their finger on why without a lot of extra analysis being put into it. So is this a good thing that we have this information? Is it a bad thing? Does this make us too literate, and so now like our standard of what's good is kind of held to some unrealistic expectations at times? Perhaps. And I think these kind of are really important questions to ask ourselves as we do become more literate with our consumption of media over the years. And so Captini says, can we overanalyze the Angelicus? Can we analyze Ava, movies included? So I am legitimately thinking about like comparing Ava to Dark Souls, but I don't know. It's pretty rough, and like that whole community is just kind of a bucket of crabs. What the author says is canon until the author dies, right? The authors are always dead. Yeah, devil's advocate, death of the author. You think people forget sometimes that writers do things on purpose? Yeah, they screw up our favorite stories. That's what they do, right? No. How you want to interpret it is up to you, but that's the meaning you're adding. Yeah, and that's something you can't necessarily control a lot of either. I mean, you can, but sometimes the blue drapes represent the father's struggle with alcoholism. Sometimes the drapes are just blue. And sometimes the budget wasn't high enough to get the drapes that the set designer really wanted. Where the hell would you even begin with the Ava and DS comparison? Well, alright, you've activated my trap card. I gotta wait half a second for Windows to index my actual folder so I can pull up these files. Man, I really hate how crappy Windows search and folders are anymore. So, what do we have here? Here we go. Message. Only those with the will to live get to survive. Do I even really need to say more about about how Ava and Dark Souls are similar? No, we aren't returning to nothingness. I'm simply returning everything to its beginning. All right, yeah, that's enough of a teaser right there. It's like once you like see the rationale, it just becomes too obvious almost. You love trap cards? Protag actually told Mortis his Ava comparison theory, so you know a decent amount about it, yeah. Okay. Don't forget the rebuild? No, I would prefer to forget the rebuilds, thank you.
He used the exact same technique in Brokeback Mountain.
I played it as though I knew what was going on with Jake's character Jack, and that he had been cheating on me with men, and I knew about the gay bashing, and I also played it as though I had no idea that this is how my husband died. And those takes got merged in the final film, so I don't actually know. Aang knows the truth in his head, and it's not important to me, because I think the ambiguity is what is the strength of that scene and what's heartbreaking about it.
When filmmakers create a movie with multiple meanings, they tend to keep their intent a secret.
Anyone else have a theory about what it could be? You see, it's good. I'm not going to say what it is. You could. Can I? No, you may not.
I never talk about themes. It's a very big shame when something is finished and then people want you to translate it back into words. It never will work. It never will go back into words and be what the film is. It's like describing a piece of music. You don't hear the music, you just see the words. It's better to let people conjure up their own ideas, having seen and experienced the film.
I mean, they want you to say, I think, this is a story of the duality of man and the duplicity of governments, or something like that. And, I hear people try to do it sometimes in interviews. It usually is bullshit, or if the work is good, it's sort of, it's usually irrelevant.
Kubrick might be the best director to look at when discussing overanalyzing because his movies are some of the most analyzed in American cinema. The documentary Room 237 focuses entirely on fan theories about The Shining. Some of the ideas suggested in the documentary are pretty ridiculous, like when they claim Kubrick airbrushed his own face into the clouds as the family drives to the hotel. After hearing about his intense shooting schedules and extremely detailed...
That really feels like a lore brain moment that I can... There's just something about that kind of like theorizing which is just really, really funny to me because what was the video called yesterday where I think it was like the Elden conspiracy was talking about what could have been under the cloud in the middle of the map, like where Fair Azula could have allegedly been. So just like the whole like cloud thing coming up right now is just kind of really hitting me hard. Yeah, so, okay, anyway, that's not important.
As the family drives to the hotel. After hearing about his intense shooting schedules and extremely detailed production design, fans have seemed to build a mythos around Kubrick, believing he put specific meaning into every little thing.
I mean, despite all of the sort of apocryphal stories about me, almost all of which are untrue, you don't have unlimited resources, and they do watch the budget, and you do have to account for what you're doing.
The stories about Kubrick largely ignore how he himself described his shooting process. He says he actually doesn't always put a particular meaning in his directing choices.
I'm pretty good at generalized statements, but when I'm asked, what is this, I still can't tell somebody what Paths of Glory is about. I find it's much more of an intuitive process, more like what I would imagine writing music is like, rather than a sort of structuring an argument.
This intuitive approach doesn't make Kubrick's films any less meaningful. It just means while he's making the movie, his intent isn't always immediately obvious to him. He instead makes choices that feel right, instead of constantly dealing with hidden meanings.
So, I think this may inadvertently be brushing some things under the rug. So, at least with what Kubrick was talking about with the other movie, I think Path to Glory, he said. I don't remember the actual title of the movie. I'm not familiar with it. He might not like have a picture of every single scene in his head, but he definitely has a feel of where the story is supposed to go, like based off the script. It's his job as the director to direct the film and get from point A to point B. So it's not as though like every little detail is crafted by him, which kind of goes hand in hand with our lore community's loving joke of how Miyazaki placed every blade of grass in Elden Ring by hand individually in the game. So I think that kind of comparison could be applied to Stanley Kubrick as well. And with that being said, there's certainly a lot of visual symbolism that he uses throughout his films, which other people can pick up on. Whether that's intended by Kubrick is another story, but setting all of that aside, he's extremely well known for the kind of conditions that he will put his actors through to get the takes that he wants. And so there's certainly a heavy amount of deliberation with which he directs his movies, which is a little bit uncharacteristic of other directors in terms of like the lengths that he goes through to get what he wants at times. So I do appreciate that point that Kubrick brought up, that like there are limited resources, there's budgets that they need to worry about, so even he is constrained, because that also does help ground his movies and like the stories surrounding them in a bit more reality than I think some people might give them credit for. Or anyway, someone do a video comparing Kubrick to Miyazaki. I mean, I'm sure it's probably in the works somewhere. Maybe not right this moment, but we'll probably get it eventually. People overanalyzing the Shining movie. Me. He tortured Shelley and you also prefer the book. Yeah. It's all about the red book. The red rum. You feel like I'm side-eyeing TA a bit with the Miyazaki mention? Actually, no. He didn't even cross my mind. Huh. No, I mean, the visual stuff, that's just like a difference in the way that we approach the games, but yeah, maybe. I guess if you want to make that comparison, there might be a little bit of aptness to it, but I'm sure, like, even I can be blamed to some degree for doing something similar, so maybe I'm the one throwing a stone and living in a glass house to a degree. You refer to the every blade of grass thing as pixel hunting? Shelley actually spoke very highly of Kubrick and has emphatically said she wasn't actually mistreated. Is that just the press talking, or is this like something done like years after the fact and she's kind of gotten over it? Because I know she had like a lot of issues beyond this film and stuff, but yeah, I'm only vaguely familiar with like the whole situation and the aftermath. In The Shining, he didn't even tell the kid what the movie was about. That's not too uncommon from what I understand. We all do it. It's what makes it fun. Maybe. I like to be a little bit self-aware and, try to be as little of a hypocrite as I can. Kid was like 5. It makes sense. And next thing you're going to tell me is the little kid wasn't really in front of a hallway of oozing blood at all.
Never deal with subtext when I'm writing. Ever, ever, ever. I keep it about the text. I keep it about the scenario because I know there's a lot there, but I don't want to know it right now.
So where does that leave room for analysis? In both cases where directors hide the meaning and where they don't work with a specific meaning in mind, the viewer can't know the objective truth. But that doesn't mean analysis is hopeless.
The very basic things, especially from where Mr. Orange is coming from. I'm dying and I want to go to the hospital. But just in writing those words, just all this stuff just started pouring out. And that was when I realized it was a father-son story going on.
In this interview, Tarantino reveals a crucial truth about filmmaking. He shows us how he subconsciously put a deeper meaning in his movie. It doesn't matter if directors work with one meaning in mind or work purely on intuition. Everybody brings their prior experiences with them in the creative choices they make. And that doesn't stop at the director. Every person involved in the process of filmmaking places their worldview into the work. And a good analysis reveals these hidden meanings.
To me, it's very obvious. I mean, of course, King Kong is a metaphor for the slave trade. I'm not saying the makers of King Kong meant it to be that way, but that's the movie that they made, whether they meant to make it or not.
This analysis works because it fits with the time.
And yeah, I think that's incredibly important to keep in mind as we analyze fiction ourselves. And I think it's kind of funny where like Tarantino was just talking about how he doesn't think about subtext a moment ago, and then he's talking about the subtext of King Kong, which I don't think these two ideas contradict. So I'm not trying to say like, oh, gotcha, Tarantino. I'm not trying to like misconstrue his words there. I think both can exist at the same time in that while he might not have initially thought about that subtext, it could have been added in post. I mean, not like literally post, but like added after the fact, or just like became aware to him after the fact. And so, yeah, I don't know. Scalise says, Kubrick got famous for being super intricate and detail-oriented, so people go crazy looking for stuff that may or not be there. That may or may not be there. Sounds like somebody else I know. You think Kubrick got inspired by Miyazaki? To word what Tarantino and Kubrick were saying differently, they trust their instincts that much. I think there's a certain amount of intent to it, but yeah, I feel like you're not wrong, and I'm not trying to disagree with you, but I feel like instinct underplays. Man, how do I phrase this? It's like, even for them, if it's instinct or intuition, there's still a certain amount of craft that goes in their work where it becomes intentional even beyond their conscious mind. Like, they have certain thematics, they have certain visuals that they want to convey across the screen, and their whole goal as directors are to be storytellers of not just the whole overarching piece of work, but also storytellers for each individual scene and each individual cut, although some of that is also due to editing and whatnot. Hey, Without Horns, welcome into chat. We are on The Art of Overanalyzing Movies by Now You See It. Best way to get film bros mad is when you tell them you don't especially care for Kubrick movies. What, talking about Watchmen with Rorschach? Not yet, at least. Just say you shouldn't have to work that hard to find the meaning? Yeah. No, it's understandable, Teen Sith. Okay.
Period the movie was made. It's not only convincing, but the analysis also makes the movie more impactful. Some interpretations seem to miss that analysis should add something meaningful to the movie. In this particular interpretation, King Kong shows how white people of the 1930s may have feared the free black population in America. Not only is that interpretation well supported, but it also invites the viewer to think about the movie in a fresh and interesting way. Even if it is true that Kubrick airbrushed his face into the clouds, how does that add to the movie? And strangely enough, maybe some stories...
And those are the types of questions that I like to ask people who I think might have fallen a bit too far down the rabbit hole of lore for the FromSoft games, is when they get really into the weeds of like, oh, what does this detail mean? I'm like, okay, let's say for a second that detail does exist the way that you think it does. How does that actually impact our understanding of the story, if at all? And I feel like a lot of times it doesn't. And it's just kind of some people just tunnel visioning on things a bit too much. And I'm sure that happens to me at times as well. Yeah, that's why I was saying that I don't think instinct conflicts with skill or like intuition, but there's also something like deeper behind it, which I think your 200 character word limit couldn't quite express as well as couldn't turn as much attention to it as I think it could deserve. I don't know if I'm articulating that well or not.
Are better enjoyed without analysis. Kubrick once said if you submit to a completely logical and detailed analysis of a supernatural movie, it will eventually appear absurd. The true measure of a great supernatural thriller, he says, isn't in its hidden meaning, but in if the audience had a good fright, believed the film they were watching, and retained some sense of it. With Brokeback Mountain, the true analysis of Jack's death isn't what matters. The fact that Ang Lee leaves the audience uncertain of Jack's fate makes his ending that much more heartbreaking. There's no sense of closure for us or for Ennis. So maybe the next time you watch the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey, don't obsess over the details. Kubrick actually did reveal what he was going for in that ending.
I tried to avoid doing this ever since the picture came out, because when you just say the ideas, they sound foolish, whereas if they're dramatized, one feels it.
I'll link his interpretation in the description, but before you click on that, watch the ending one more time and think about the emotion it evokes. Because even with a particular meaning in mind, Kubrick built that ending based not around his own meaning, but around how he wanted it to make you feel. So when your teacher overanalyzes blue curtains in a story, the problem isn't that it's not what the artist meant. The problem may be that the teacher got so caught up in analysis that they missed what made the book so great in the first place.
Lord, our sweet romance.
A big problem with
And I think one issue that like teachers might have particularly is that if you look at it from their perspective, they're probably talking about a story that they've already talked about with other classes for a number of years. So for them, the actual impact of the story is trite and commonplace for them. Whereas for like newer students, they might not pick up on more of the subtextual stuff, like, oh no, Lords of the Flies, the conch shell starts losing color, and that means civilization is fading within the children as the color of the conch fades.
Overanalyzing film comes from under-researching. If an analysis is inconsistent with the rest of the movie or doesn't have a lot of concrete evidence, it doesn't hold up well. In most areas of film criticism, education is key to coming up with the best analysis. When it comes to actual film production, the same principles apply. To learn more about filming professional footage with tools you already own, you can sign up for the DIY filming class on Skillshare. Skillshare has over 20,000 classes that cover tons of topics from business to filmmaking. The first 500 people to click on the link in the description below can get 2 months of completely free access to Skillshare. That's the filmmaking class plus thousands of others ranging from creative writing, marketing, and design. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring this video.
Elden Ring is a masterpiece when it comes to world building and lore, but this is a Festivus.
Speaking of smooth transitions, that was almost too smooth. All right, I'm gonna back it up, and then I'm gonna link you guys the Art of Overanalyzing Movies if you want to give the channel a like or a sub yourself. So it's definitely a fantastic channel. Another good channel like this, if you're unfamiliar with this type of video essay and whatnot, is Every Frame a Painting. These two channels are really amazing for deconstructing a lot of like what takes place in scenes in movies, which I highly recommend if you want to get more media literacy on these types of topics. So yeah, I enjoyed this video quite a bit and had some good discussions about it. And yeah, I meant to welcome back in Chadwick Dillon. Nice to see you again to the stream. Yeah, you've missed quite a bit of a convo on overanalyzing movies and consuming fiction wrong. Children are huge jerks, yeah. The best part of Lords of the Flies is when the situation happened in real life, the boys worked together to survive until they were rescued. True, yeah. You don't like Lord of the Flies because it felt like it was written with too much spite. The thing is, it can be a bit believable. I mean, one of the things that really fascinates me about Stephen King and his writing in particular is that he has a knack for writing some real jerks. And I'm like, just who the hell existed in Stephen King's life to inspire him so well to make such shitty characters? And, yeah, that's just kind of like one of the weird things to like think about, that in many ways, one's capacity to make a compelling story is contingent on having compelling antagonists. And there are a number of ways in which you can have a person just be an absolutely shitty person, but be absolutely show-stealing with the way they interact with others. So, to move away from Stephen King for a moment, I think like one of the best examples for film, which comes from like Tarantino's work, would be Hans Landa in *Inglourious Bastards*. The kind of German SS Nazi sleuth who goes around finding the Jews, but he doesn't even really care about that. He's just kind of like this force of his own, and he kind of steals every scene that he's in because he seems to know exactly what's going on. And whenever he's anywhere on the screen, there's just so much tension added to that film, because if he gets his gears turning one way, you absolutely believe he is capable enough to turn the situation south. So, anyway. I guess Stephen King inspired him. Hayu finds the conversation revolving stuff like The Watchmen, Rorschach, and Starship Troopers interesting, where that the author-director intended is the complete opposite of what they produced. It's almost like King went to public school. I mean, even then, like, not everybody who went to public school is going to have such terrible people, like, influence their lives. So, what's another... Okay, so this example of a villain, I think, is one of the most villainous villains to have ever villained, and I think is very often underlooked, would be Dolores Umbridge in the Harry Potter series. Now, obviously, because Harry Potter is so freaking overhyped, it might be a disservice to say that she's underlooked, but in more ways, I think it is more natural to feel a kind of visceral hatred for Dolores Umbridge that is miles beyond the type of disdain anybody could try to give Voldemort, because there's something inherent within the characterization of Umbridge to me, which is just so much more banal than the ideological garbage that Voldemort brings to the wizarding world of Harry Potter. So everybody in their life has probably encountered an Umbridge of some sort who is mildly incompetent, yet wields their authority like a bludgeon in all of the wrong ways for all of the wrong reasons, and follows the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. Whereas Voldemort just has some like idealistic things which just don't make sense, and so it's kind of harder to develop an emotional response to that, at least for me. So it's a lot easier for me to hate Umbridge than Voldemort, is the point I'm making. Yeah, Umbridge is a better villain than Voldemort for a book about a magic school? True. Dolores felt very real and like the adults you knew as a kid? Yeah, exactly. Teen says, a Harry Potter hater? You've been trying to avoid going on your sorting hat this whole time? I mean, there's a lot to dislike about Harry Potter, don't get me wrong, but I do think Umbridge is a fantastic villain for all of the wrong reasons, which is precisely the right reasons to hate her. Yeah, Stella brings up the great point that the problem with satire is it usually goes over the heads of the people that it's satirizing. Or you said criticizing, but yeah. That's the magic of satire. They aren't supposed to get it. We are. Okay. So, yeah, this was a great video by Now You See It, The Art of Overanalyzing Movies. I'm going to go ahead and link it in the chat again. And then we'll go ahead and transition into my airing of grievances with Elden Ring lore by the Garrulous Goldmask.
Elden Ring is a masterpiece when it comes to world building and lore, but this is a Festivus episode.
The tradition of Festivus begins with the airing of grievances. I got a lot of problems with you people. Now you're gonna hear about it.
So talking about our meta-knowledge of gaming and media in general, apparently Frank Costanza's Festivus was based off of one of the writer's fathers who actually had something like this going on with their family, except Festivus wasn't necessarily reserved to a specific time of year, and the airing of grievances could apparently just occur whenever. But of course for the show they made it a bit more of like a more defined thing, and so there's just kind of is even funnier to me that like this kind of unbelievable, fantastic holiday of Festivus is based off of like the quirks of a real life family, because there is something very relatable to almost anything in the Seinfeld episodes, precisely because they came from the lives of the writers, whether that be like Larry David or one of the other ones who may not have as much public recognition.
My biggest complaints with the game is the incredibly convoluted timeline. We don't really know when major events happened, even though they should be common knowledge. For instance, did Marika shatter the Elden Ring before or after Mikola was kidnapped? The intro cinematic makes it sound like the former, but if you talk to Gideon after defeating Melania, he says this.
I heard speculation Mikola embedded himself in the hair-lit tree, but before he could finish, someone cut the tree open and absconded with his infant form. Perhaps the Queen's sorrow was justified.
It makes it sound like Marika was driven by grief to shatter the Elden Ring, but only after Mikola was kidnapped. And this is just...
And yeah, I think that's a fair grievance to air. The way that I would try to reconcile this is playing my mental gymnastics of saying, oh, well, Gideon says it, and he says he heard that from somebody else, and it's kind of all speculation, so maybe they don't really know. But yeah, that's just one of many examples of Elden Ring being a bit difficult to parse, I suppose.
Just one of many events that shouldn't require some elaborate lore theory to piece together when they occurred. When was the Star Scourge conflict? Did Miquella and Melania exist at the same time as Godwyn? How much time happened between the Night of the Black Knives and the Shattering of the Elden Ring? And how much time happened between the Shattering of the Elden Ring and the Shattering War? And how much time has actually passed since the Shattering War? It comes off as really contrived when we can still talk to the participants in those events. We can not only talk to Ranni, we can even marry her and be on a honeymoon for 1,000 years. Now, again, there are a lot of great theories about when exactly these events happened. But that's my point, is that we shouldn't have to come up with theories for when something happened. I think what's more interesting to speculate about and try to understand is what exactly happened or why it happened. That is, someone's motives behind it. And having a
And I agree with a lot of that, with especially trying to understand the motives of these characters. And it does annoy me to no end that our Tarnished is so lackadaisical. They don't bother to ask Ranni, the main orchestrator of the Night of the Black Knives, like, yo, why'd you even want Godwyn dead anyway to begin with? Just curious, you know? There's just absolutely nothing going on between those Tarnished ears. Anyway. So, Special Noob had asked, how do I reconcile the Carrion Queen situation? Could you elaborate? Because I'm not sure exactly what you mean by Carrion Queen situation. And Morta says, Gurm said that 5,000 years was the timeline before the shattering, but who knows, that could have changed or been an example. It could have just been an arbitrary number, just something that he threw out as well. The problem with Gideon being presented as all-knowing is that as the player, we have meta out-of-universe access to all the information in the game. Sort of. But yeah, I mean, some of that stuff could be a diegetic that the Tarnished just kind of like learns on their own. Depending on like how relevant one wants to consider how in Bloodborne, the character can touch the skull of Lawrence, the vicar of the first vicar of the healing church, and kind of like see a memory of Lawrence talking to Willem to literally gain knowledge of the adage which is required to pass into the Bergenworth gates. I've wondered whether or not that principle can be applied to like the items that the good hunter touches. So like if you touch what's a weird weapon that just kind of like stands out? Anyway, I'm trying to like, I'm failing to think of like a really good example of something that would just be very clearly outside information that the hunter kind of learns. But I think there's something else in there that like makes it make sense. Like the hunter like at times has this weird kind of knowledge base, but it doesn't really get touched on. Anyway, not too important. And so, oh yeah, with the whole like Elden Ring stuff, I've wondered whether or not a similar type of mechanic is at play here, where we kind of learn things through the items we pick up. Because at the very least, memories are embedded within Ashes of War. You can pick up lost ashes. Memories can be embedded within equipment, arguably, when you look at the twinned armor set of the D-Twins, where the armor wishes to go back to its other brother, essentially. So there's a lot of oddities here as well. You suspect Gideon's epithet of the all-knowing is supposed to be ironic. I don't know if it's supposed to be ironic as much of it is supposed to be like an ideal that he aspires to, but then he reveals to us later on that it's one of those ideals that can never be attained because it's supposed to be an ideal. Definitely becomes ironic, but he was earnestly devoted to it, yeah. Special Noob said, Renala is described as the founding Carian royal house coming down from the mountains, but also as the dynasty of Carian queens. Yeah, I don't think there's any contradiction with that. So, the Karian royal house was founded by Renala. There is no line of royal queens, like plural. This is one of those issues with Japanese, I believe, where plurality is not often indicated, and I think the English localizers just took a stab in the dark and they put queens plural for like the generations thing. So hold on, they didn't put queens there. I should probably pull up the text, but anyway, the Dark Moon Greatsword, or it's the key that like gets you the ring, one of those items. It talks about how it is a gift that was like passed down from successive generations of like the Karian queen to the princesses and whatnot. But the issue here, I think, could be related to what happens in Bloodborne when you talk to Walter and you complete his League questline. He will give you his bucket helmet, and when you get it from Walter, it says it's been passed down for generations from Master of the League to like the next Master, which is technically true even if you only have 2 generations. So Walter is the first generation who passes it to the second generation, so it's been passed down between generations, not necessarily 4 generations. But anyway, the reason why that is relevant is if you do not complete Walter's quest and just kill him and steal his bucket helm, it doesn't have that line about being passed down for generations, and I think that's supposed to be indicative of it not being passed down for generations, because I think it's supposed to be abundantly clear that Walter is the founder of the League, because he is described as the Beast Eater, and the whole story of the League is predicated on it stemming from the Beast Eater and whatnot. Ronnie also calls her the last queen of Karya, which makes it sound like there is more than one. So you could be the first and the last of something. I don't think there's any contradiction there. So I think the issue is like by Ronnie calling Renala the last queen of Karya, she is emphasizing that she takes no claim of queenship for her own. And so she's kind of like emphasizing the difference in their relationship, or her relationship to the throne. Like, she did not ascend. She absconded her royal duties, I guess, because she's off doing her lunar princess stuff. Okay. Going back to our grievances with Elden Ring lore.
A proper timeline can really give us a firmer grasp of the world's events and the lore. And once you have an understanding of the lore, then we can talk about the more compelling aspects of a work, like the narrative themes or the deeper philosophical meanings. Just to clarify, when it comes to the really ancient civilizations, like the Claymen or Elden John, it makes sense that we don't really know when these exactly happened, and we have to turn to some type of digital archaeology to uncover it, and try to...
So that's a bold claim to say that this is Mikola, by the way, and they'll explain in another video. I'm just gonna go ahead and flat out disagree, because this is a full-on adult dude by the looks of things, and it should well predate Mikola. So yeah, I would just vehemently disagree with that.
Happened, and we have to turn to some type of digital archaeology to uncover it and try to learn about these civilizations. I don't have a problem with that. That would make sense in keeping with the setting. In a way, the timeline reminds me a lot of some of the other criticisms that have been levied against Elden Ring for its bosses, that they just got to be way too overtuned and way too complicated. One of the aspects I love about FromSoft games is that you can come across some random item description and it can drastically change your view of the game's lore.
So he says, case in point, they did an entire lore video about Aldia's impact in Dark Souls 3, inspired by the spell and its Japanese version, and you're doing that as a prequel or a sequel to that video. So yeah, for anybody who may not know, the description for Soul Stream, which is called Soul Geyser in Dark Souls 2, but it has the same Japanese name between the games, talks about sorcery imparted by the first of the scholars when Lothric and the Grand Archives were but young. The Japanese for this is similar. I think it talks about like the first or original scholar, which is a kind of ambiguous veiled reference to Aldia, but it's a pretty direct nod to him, all things considered. Because in Dark Souls 2, Soul Geyser was said to have been an heirloom of the family Aldia and whatnot. Well, it doesn't say it exactly like that, but you get the point.
See things in an entirely new perspective. And that's also one of the things I loathe about FromSoft. What I want to focus on are game-changing item descriptions, but they're placed in needlessly obscure locations that are completely divorced from how you get them. For me, the best example of this is the Order Healing spell. Now, this spell is absolutely key to understanding one of the game's 6 endings, the Age of Order ending that you achieve with the Gold Mask quest. The noble Gold Mask lamented what had become of the hunters, how easy it is for learning and learnedness to be reduced to the ravings of fanatics. All the good and the great wanted, in their foolishness, was an absolute evil to contend with. Does such a notion exist in the fundamentals of order? This spell makes it clear that Goldmask's opposition to the Golden Order is because it's a flawed, oppressive institution. Without this context, this key insight into Goldmask's philosophy is completely lost.
And I disagree with this reading of it. I don't think he thinks it's an oppressive institution as much as it is that he thinks the people in charge frickin' suck and they should let the system do the work for them. So anyway, that's not too important. So Scal Easy asked, which armor description changes when you remove the cape? So that's pretty common. I don't remember exactly which one you're talking about because there are multiple ones, as far as I'm aware. But yeah. All right, going back to the video.
And since the Age of Order ending is basically a Mass Effect 3 ending with a gold filter, you don't really get a lot of information about what Goldmask is trying to achieve. So I completely understand why some people might view the Goldmask ending as potentially sinister if they never came across this spell. You don't actually come across this incantation during Goldmask's quest. You have to kill a teardrop scarab that's in the Shifra Aqueduct that you can only reach after you defeat General Radon and reach the upper part of Nokron. So just for you keeping score at home, it's found in a hidden area within a secret area. If you got this spell during the quest line, I wouldn't have an issue with it. Even if you just put this teardrop scarab near the statue of Radagon, there's already a teardrop scarab that drops a spell not too far away from the Radagon statue. You could have just put it there. Another great
I think that's a pretty fair criticism. I'm trying to remember what that scarab gives you. I think it's something pretty cool. Is it the, not immutable shield, but the other one that like actually makes you immune? Something along those lines. It's some kind of incantation related thing. Anyway, that's not too important, but I do think that kind of grievance is pretty valid, and it is like one of the criticisms I also have about Elden Ring, where I feel the overall quality of the polish of Elden Ring is lower because things are so disparate and set off from each other that there's not a lot of relevance to where you find them. Whereas it was a little bit easier to suspend one's disbelief when playing games like Dark Souls 3, Bloodborne, and even like Dark Souls 1, just because of the idea that certain figures could have passed through these like locations, but that feels a little bit harder to believe in Elden Ring when the world is so much larger and there's never like really a good reason that one would expect Goldmask to go into the underground for, which doesn't mean he didn't ever go down there, but what is Order Healing doing under there? Well, you might be able to headcanon that Order Healing spell could be related to the younger brother D, since he's at the aqueduct as well and he's a hunter. So there is like some kind of a thematic relevance, but then it's like, why put it on the scarab and why not let the younger brother have it and like you take it from him or something? And you know, that could like open yourself up to other criticisms as well. So I'm not like saying that's like the solution one should have, but I'm just saying I don't know, just like the game feels more gamey and less narratively driven than some of the other ones, which I think really just speaks to how the other games are also like Elden Ring, but they don't feel like Elden Ring because they're smaller and more self-contained in general. It's a shield thing. Yeah, that's what I thought. The game is too darn big. Yeah, maybe. I didn't really have too many issues because I'm the type of person who really likes exploring anyway. So I found like maybe 95% of all the content in the game after my first playthrough. And then I just had to go back and find like the few things that I missed or like duplicate some items that I wanted two of. So like the scavenger curve sword, you can only pick up one per playthrough, which is kind of annoying. But anyway, going back to the video.
Example is the Helfen Steeple. This is the lampwood which guides the dead of the spirit world. The lamplight is similar to grace in appearance, only it is said that it can only be seen by those who met their death in battle. So this item description confirms the existence of a spirit world, which I think could be the setting for the DLC. But you don't get this item through any sort of important quest or massive dungeon hunting. No, you get it by killing a random Tibio Mariner in the mountaintops of the Giants. I can see how a Tibio Mariner would have the lampwood, but he can be the 4th Tibio Mariner you encounter in the game. And he doesn't even have a boss health bar. Then we have items that have a really bizarrely low drop rate for some reason. For instance, there's the Sun Realm Shield, which talks about the seat of the sun. The sun doesn't really have that prominent of a place in the Lands Between. So a shield with this depiction shows that the sun was once a much more important symbol, and yet you only get this shield if you form a certain type of Skelly Boy. There's also the Haligtree Crest Great Shield, which has, I think, maybe one of the only depictions of how Mikola's Haligtree was supposed to look. You can only get this shield if you form one specific Haligtree Knight at the bottom of Elphael.
For what it's worth, in Elphael, there are a ton of Haligtree banners as well. So like I feel like that overall point is kind of a little bit diminished by focusing on that specific example. But nonetheless, it does also frustrate me how a single player game does have such horridly, abysmally low drop rates for certain items when they're only dropped by a couple of specific enemies in the entire game. So for me, a couple of the worst items to farm were the Burial Tree Watchdog swords, or was it the staff? Maybe you can pick up the staff like through story progression, or like relatively speaking, like you pick it up from something specific. But having to farm like the Watchdog swords really sucks. Having to farm the stupid Envoy Great Hammer, or like the super big one, or even like any of the Envoy ones kind of sucks. But the medium-sized boys and the giant boys, those were awful for me, at least. And then I probably also got lucky on a couple of drops where I didn't have to farm super long, but it's so annoying to me. It would be nice if they modernized a game a bit more and had like, I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of beyond the point. Does no one else have one file where you get every item in the game? No, I've got one where I've got 2 of every item in the game because I want to dual wield, except for the Rykard spear because I can't pick up another one of that for whatever reason. Yada says it's mostly a him thing, but he just doesn't like the open world, so it detracts from the experience. Yada likes the game in spite of that, but you'd like it more if it was smaller. And yeah, I think one of the issues for me with the open world is once you know where everything is, or like try to do New Game Plus, it just feels a bit more tedious to traverse through it. So I really would have liked having a kind of room that exists in the Round Table Hold or something like that, where you could use something like imbued sword keys to just kind of like teleport throughout the world from the very beginning of the game, so that way you could like out of sequence enemies and do stuff to make New Game Pluses feel different, or randomizers, something else. It's just like the game needs a couple more enemy types and a couple more locations and more reasons to visit some of the side areas. And there's not a lot of reason to do that on subsequent playthroughs. Needing their soul to drop the physical stuff is silly no matter what. Do skeletons drop the crude looking scythe? You killed maybe 600 of them and never got it. Typically, oh wait, no, there is the one scythe that you cannot pick up. So maybe not. But typically, if you ever see an enemy wielding a weapon, you are very likely to be able to get a version of that weapon. But that doesn't necessarily mean that those enemies drop that weapon. So one example of that would be in the Minor Erdtree Church on Altus Plateau. It has Minor Erdtree Guardians that have the red flowers blooming on their backs. But if you kill those enemies, they do not actually drop that armor. Oh, here's a better one because this is a weapon one. So the Black Flame monks within Caelid Divine Tower, which have like the wavy, fiery looking sword, they don't drop those weapons. The only way you can get that weapon specifically is if you go up here to the mountaintops and go into the, what's it called? The giant conquering hero's grave, something like that. And there's a red Black Flame monk who drops the wavy sword weapon for whatever reason. And I think there's literally only 2 of those in the entire game, which you can farm for that. And oh yeah, another terrible thing to farm was like all of the high pages set, because there's only 3 in Lindell and then 1 in Rayo Lucaria in front of the Graven School Mass thing. So it's just not a good time farming for certain equipment. The Grave Scythe was a letdown because you can't use a skull spell attack that the enemies that wield it use. Yeah. Yeah, I know which one you're talking about, Captini. Yeah, but that's like one of the very few weapons you cannot obtain in the game that an enemy does use. Alright.
My criticism is with items that are just needlessly obscure, because in some instances it does make sense from a lore perspective why it would be hidden away or obscure. A great example of this is the primeval sorcery Founding Reign of Stars, which is hidden away in the Heretical Rise. I don't really have an issue with those type of placements because it would make sense that a heretical type of sorcery that would be locked away or suppressed by a ruling authority. Finally, one other thing that's really mystifying is just how many changes were made between the 1.0 text of the.
This is a good point that he's going to bring up in a moment, but I'm a little bit surprised he didn't talk about how Renala pretty much uses Comet Azure when the Primeval Current is allegedly banished or exiled from the Academy by her, or how Comet Azure is reskinned as Night Comet in the Sword of Night and Flame, which is different than the Night Comet spell. It's kind of a mess.
The game and the current version of the game. When I say 1.0, this is the retail version of the game that you can play as long as you don't connect to the internet. Having cut content in the game development cycle is completely understandable and natural, and having day one patches to fix bugs or rebalance weapons is also standard in the industry. What Elden Ring does is they drastically change their lore between the version on the game disc and what's currently available. Many thanks to Zully the Witch for compiling all of these changes. I've never seen a game change so much of its lore with a day one patch. Some changes are just fun, like Radahn had a pet cat, or Rykard was canonically bi, but other differences have massive implications. For instance, Mikola was effectively confirmed as the successor to Marika, and Radagon sent soldiers to help Mikola in the Haligtree. Or we learn that the Beast Folk got their intelligence specifically from the Greater Will intervening, which is very unusual since the Greater Will has a very passive presence in the game, almost to the point where it could basically not exist. And it doesn't end with item descriptions either. FromSoft is well known for their environmental storytelling, and there were a few cases where they actually patched in new environmental details. As Bodo Please showed in a great video, in the original 1.0 version of the game, E.G. wasn't on fire, he was just surrounded by a bunch of Black Knife assassins. But
I'm pretty confident that's not true, because I have a 1.0 playthrough archived on my channel, and he was definitely on fire, so I wonder if this is specific to like Xbox or something, because my version of 1.0
Jake Knight here
was on what's it called, PS5. Oh, I'm gonna need to like look it up. EG. Yeah, I want to look this up. I don't think it would be this episode. What would I have put in the title? Ronnie? Okay. So let me pull this up. We might be able to see it. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm like misremembering. So it's Estelle. Okay, that's good sign right there. So this is me fighting Blythe. So I'd probably see EG right after this, because that's when EG dies. So that's Ronnie.
When I do,
Alright.
I only hope.
When she says like a Gray Dawn, my voice is so loud. Let me turn this down. Modern science. You don't think she really thinks it will last forever? Like, obviously every age has buttons. So they more of a vision. Oh no, he doesn't have flames. So I'm wrong. How did I not notice that? Or like remember that? On fire. So they added that in. Interesting. Like, I just thought it was more of a visual glitch that it wasn't like a red flame. So it's kind of even stranger that they added a black flame specifically. I forgot. All right. Well, I stand corrected by my own self. So that's kind of why I like to double check things for myself, because even my own memory can have gaps in it. Yada finds it a bit strange that the Carians became enemies of the Academy, but there's still a whole school of Carian sorcerers just chilling there. So I think the some of it is the Academy, and I also think some of it is the Cuckoo Knights, because we've got a bunch of dead cuckoos coming up to Caria Manor, and what are they called? The little sorcerer dudes, the Carian style sorcerers that aren't like literal Carians, may have just sided with the cuckoos.
From these showed in a great video. In the original 1.0 version of the game, EG wasn't on fire, he was just surrounded by a bunch of Black Knife assassins. But FromSoft patched in the Black Flame effect. And with this simple change, we have drastically different implications. Does this mean that the Black Knife assassins were working with the Godskin nobles? Were the Black Knife assassins also part of the Glowmite Queen's entourage? I might actually do a video breaking down all of the lore changes between the 1.0 version and today's version. Thank you so much for watching. I'm really interested to see what yins think, so let me know down below.
Yins. Alright. That's a pretty good video. I'm going to go ahead and link it into chat for you guys. The other thing that I did want to mention is some of these changes could have been due to localization, in terms of them not having a fully complete draft of the story, whether that means like the Japanese draft or their English version. It might not have been complete by the time the game went gold, so that stuff may have been always meant to have been part of the day one patch, or like the day one release cycle, but it just wasn't done in time. And the actual amount of changes between 1.0 and the day one patch is pretty staggering. Like, most of the descriptions for the spells are really just extremely bare bones, one sentences. You don't really know what they're doing. Some descriptions are like mostly absent. So I don't know whether or not you want to say like they changed the lore as much as just the lore wasn't fleshed out, at least in the English version of the game. Because the Japanese version of 1.0, as far as I'm aware, is identical to the rest of the game. Maybe there's a couple changes like to a description here or there, but if so, I don't know what they are off the top of my head, and they might not be all that significant in the grand scheme of things. So, okay. That was a good video by Garrulous Goldmask about their airing of Grievances with Elden Ring lore. Apparently, I might have some more grievances, but a lot of these align with my own as well. He also has a Pepe Sylvia PFP. Does he? I can't. Oh, yeah. There is. exactly in the background. That's kind of funny. All right. So that was a good one. Let's go ahead and transition into Is the Golden Order a Functioning Government by Jake Light.
Hello, Jake Light here, Gaming Lawyer.
I'm going to turn it down a little bit.
I know. It has been a while since I last made a video about Elden Ring. Without getting into specifics, it's because I also stream way too much on Twitch, so that has kept me from giving myself time to write up a script and get things started. But thanks to COVID forcing me to rest for 2024, and with the support of everyone watching and liking my previous videos, I can finally complete my analysis on the Golden Order's governmental system. As always, please be warned that there will be major spoilers for the game's various characters, factions, and stories, as I'll casually drop important story points here and there.
One,
So
America's
in our
Eternal
previous
Role.
couple of videos on the Golden Order, we covered what few laws we know that the citizens had to follow and what the society within was like. But how did the Order function as a government? We know that Marika proclaimed herself as the Queen of the Lands Between, since her successful campaign in conquering all over the continent with the help of Godfrey and Radagon. But at the end, she establishes a new divine order, one where she declares herself a goddess, destined to rule over other mortals. In the real world, no such being exists, so we don't really have an official definition as to what type of government the Golden Order is, the closest being that it can be considered as both a monarchy and a theocracy. So
you could also go so far as to call it a kind of cult, but yeah, it's kind of all three of these kind of things, isn't it?
before we start going through the different organizations found in the Order, the first important question to ask ourselves is, what exactly does Queen Marika contribute in the Golden Order? There's no official confirmation as to how long Marika has ruled the lands between. Based on the one thing that she has been able to provide to the citizens of the Golden Order, it could be hundreds or even thousands of years without any serious rebellion against her dictatorial rule. And that would be the power to make anyone
You want me to
live
turn it up?
forever.
Okay.
Sort of. It's most notably known as the Grace, a blessing capable of resurrecting people from the dead. Prime example is the protagonist of the game being able to revive after dying countless times. However, not everyone gets this level of instantaneous rebirth. Most citizens of the Order go through a process called the Earth Tree Burial, whereby their corpses are brought to specific catacombs to be assimilated into the roots of the Earth Tree found in them, as if to be consumed by it. Eventually, the Earth Tree will then bear fruit to people from its branches. This end process is not witnessed anywhere during the events of the game, and we only find depictions of it on door carvings in various catacombs and hanging banners in Lindale. And Marika, being intricately connected to the Earth Tree, is the one who decides who gets the blessing. Most people...
So there's a couple points here to bring up. Some of these are going to be a little bit more minor, but for example, there could be other forms of Earth Tree burial with the people not necessarily being brought into the roots of the catacombs. If you consider the jars that are next to certain minor Earth Trees, they're most likely filled with the remains of the dead, because whenever you kill a living jar, it says that it's filled with raw meat, and it's kind of revealed to us that the raw meat is the remains of people or humans or whatever you want to call, like, people in the lands between. And so if they are filled with the remains and the meat of the dead, then there's probably a kind of a Earth Tree burial type thing where the souls within the meat is meant to like get fed into those Earth Trees perhaps. And some people have theorized that the minor Earth Tree avatars would like break the jars to feed their trees, maybe. We don't really know if that works, but as far as like the blessings go, it's unclear whether or not Marika's blessings could have originally come in the form of runes, or if it's meant to be the sap that's talked about in things like the cerulean or amber seed talismans, I think. Or maybe it's the seed ones. I'm pretty sure it's the cerulean and amber seed talismans. But the other thing is the souls of the dead could congeal to become the crystallized tears, because the tears become sap, becomes amber, and like the maybe I said that the other way around, but anyway, that could be a form of of the blessing of the Erd Tree. And I've wondered whether or not tears equals sap equals blessing means that the sap is no longer flowing, or the tears no longer flowing. Did tears specifically flow during the Age of Ancients, or not Age of Ancients, the Age of Abundance? And does that mean the tears that are found by the basins of minor Erd trees, does that mean those trees are kind of in their own Age of Abundance? Maybe, maybe not. Did those crystallized tears fall a long, long time ago? Maybe, maybe not. There is the one ghost in Limgrave which asks whether the tree has produced its crystallized tear, which makes it sound like a more recent phenomenon for the minor Erd trees at the very least. But, to be fair, there are occasionally basins not next to any of the known trees, which makes me wonder whether or not the crystallized tears can form from like the pillars of light that shine down from the Erd tree. So there's just a lot of unanswered questions about that process in general. So I wasn't necessarily trying to take away anything from what they're saying here. Just wanted to give a little bit of additional context to consider. Without Horn says, it's off topic, but you wonder if runes have always been the currency or if it's a post-shattering thing. That's a good question. Based off of like Dark Souls, one would assume that it's more of a post-shattering thing, but if the runes were originally bestowed by Marika, they probably could have been a pre-shattering thing as well. But yeah, that also raises the question whether or not all of the runes came from the Elden Ring's shattering specifically, which might also be worth consideration.
Would be loyal to her either out of her divine powers or the practical benefits of being able to live for a very long time. Of course, reincarnation is going to be fun if you live a life of poverty and suffering. It could be because years of war have ravaged the lands between after the shattering. Most of the continent is uninhabitable and dangerous, but we do not see.
So yeah, the one point that I wanted to bring back up with like the whole blessings and tears, which I failed to remember in my long spiel there, was that it is unclear whether or not the people that get fed to the roots of the Erd trees come back out from the top of them, and if they do come back out of the top of them, do they actually have bodies, or are they themselves like the crystallized tears, which I was trying to allude to a moment ago.
Any cultivated lands that could have been used to produce food that can sustain a growing population of a large country. There is a particular windmill village near the royal capital of the Golden Order called Dominula, which we could infer that's where food was produced for the Order, but we know that's not true, since the villagers are secretly cannibals, capturing and eating passing travelers, and also the area lacks any wheat or cornfields nearby that would suggest they gather grains to make flour, in case they haven't always been cannibals in the past. So what is...
So I feel that's a little bit of a non sequitur in that just because they're cannibals now doesn't mean that they always were. We're kind of in a state where civilization has heavily fallen off, but I'm pretty confident there's like actual... Oops. I pressed a button. There's actual... Did I go too far? Yeah, I must have. Okay, yeah, there's actual farms here next to some of these windmills. So maybe just because they don't have like corn and whatnot, doesn't mean like they didn't have like bread. And this is like one of the moments where I wondered like if this is trying to take the environment a bit too literally, because if you want to talk about like the lack of farming and whatnot, it just feels a little bit disingenuous to not mention how like there's no real support structures for the settlements throughout the lands between. Obviously, like there's some roads and merchants which traveled between places, but a lot of what you would expect wouldn't really contribute to a like self-sustaining country in real life. And the most banal of examples, which I often turn to for like video games, is it's not like you ever really see outhouses either. You just have like poisonous poop-filled swamps in occasional nooks and crannies. You do have the random sewer in Lanedell itself, but beyond that, I mean, it doesn't have the most realistic depiction of life as we know it in the Lands Between. No Elden Post service? Oh, for shame. Actually, the funny thing is, according to content, there was like a kind of a post service with like letters and whatnot. Honored Man did a nice video on Elden Ring cuisine. Yeah. And so with that being said, like the lack of the farms and stuff, if you go into Stormvale Castle, you can still see like a bunch of food on some of the tables, like near the kitchen area or like the dining hall, I guess you could call it. So there's food in the Lands Between. So does it necessarily have to be locally produced? Maybe they trade runes for it.
What else? The Earth Tree is the answer again. Other than the power of rebirth, the Earth Tree is capable of producing some kind of sap referred to as sacred tears, which were distributed through the churches in the Lands Between. Marika herself used to even personally bestow them to people. And based on the effects of casting Earth Tree incantations, we can make an educated guess that drinking directly from the saps would provide abundance of health benefits to people, compared to just borrowing the Earth Tree's power momentarily. So the Queen could have provided the people of the Lands Between a healthy life, albeit lacking choice of food. But what about the possibility of her rule being usurped locally or being invaded from the outside? Marika is very fearful of someone or something taking away her control and authority, especially outside forces that she can't deal with alone. In other words, Her Highness needed military strength, and she made plenty through the power of family.
Chadwick says, we need a system like in Metal Gear Solid 5. Put yourself in a box, smell yourself to another part of the map. That is called a Site of Grace. Checkmate, atheists. Part 2. One militaristic family.
Since Godfrey was casted out as a tarnished, for reasons, and Radagon is just Marika herself, she needed people to help her manage the different parts of the continent, so she started making her own lords and generals, literally. The Queen's new military factions were all under control of Marika's most powerful immortal demigod offsprings, the locations of where this organization seems to be quite strategically placed as well, as they protect the Lands Between's borders from all possible invasions. First, Godwyn, her favorite son, used to defend the Golden Order's royal capital, Lindale, where the all-important Earth Tree is also located. We have previously mentioned his feats during the time he fought against the ancient dragons, and those beings might have made their assault from Varum Azula. After his death in the Night of the Black Knives, Morgoth, also Marika's son, but less favored, may have unofficially replaced him as the commander and guardian of the center of the continent, until the latest events that happened in the game. Second, Rykard, the family guy, has his manor located in Mount Gelmir, which is located next to Liurnia. So perhaps together with his Glintstone mother, Queen Renala, and the Academy of Raya Lucaria, they once defended the western region until the shattering occurred. Third, Radahn, the mightiest demigod amongst Marika's children, is stationed in Caelid, where he guarded the southeastern region of the continent. That is, if we are basing our findings only during the time the protagonists find themselves in. Radahn perhaps have also governed over the entire southern region, simply because Godric was never the original lord of the Stormvale Castle in Limgrave until the shattering occurred. According to the Mimic's Vale, he was just a simple nobleman that lived in Lindale at the time before being chased away. The only clue that supports this theory is a character named Commander O'Neill, which is a boss you fight in Caelid. Throughout the battle, he periodically summons spirits that are literally the same soldiers you fight in Stormvale Castle. Why he might be related to Radahn instead is because of his weapon's description.
So, hold on, that's kind of a weird transition, I think. So, just to talk about the whole idea of the nobles running away from the royal capital, I think that's pretty substantiated through all of the wandering nobles throughout the Lands Between. If you pick up their weapons, like the withered swords, I guess not withered, the weathered swords, weathered straight sword, whatever it's called, as well as their equipment, they talk about like them fleeing the capital or like leaving their homeland or not being able to go home, something along those lines. And it's because like the Shattering War was too intense, so they just kind of all went their own separate ways, and they just like continue to wander after that.
Time before being chased away. The only clue that supports this theory is a character named Commander O'Neill, which is a boss you fight in Caelid. Throughout the battle, he periodically summons spirits that are literally the same soldiers you fight in Stormvale Castle. Why he might be related to Rodan instead is because of his weapon's description. As it says, a beaten red battle standard is furled around this time-worn halberd. Even after his lord was fled, Commander O'Neill continued to brandish this flag in the devastation of the rot-eaten field of battle, a sole veteran who remembers this battle with pride. Aside from the red flag on a weapon which resembles the colors worn by the Rodan's soldiers, it's also mentioned that the commander's lord was fled. Lord referring to Rodan, and fled meaning being carried to safety from the rot-eaten field of battle.
So this is going to be a contentious statement on my part, but that standard is actually substantially different from Rodan's standard. That's not the contentious part. But this, I would argue, is probably more a symbol of allegiance to either Sarash and or the Stormlord, or at the very least a kind of standalone banished knight standard. So let me go ahead and pull up some images for you guys to show this off. Which I believe I titled this one Banner. Okay. So, nope, this is not the right one. Alright. In Stormvale Castle, there are a couple of banners that are still up in the ramparts. And this is the exact same design which is on the rallying banner used by Commander O'Neill and whatnot. The only difference is this is on a field of green as opposed to a field of red. However, within Stormvale Castle, there's also the room with the Banished Knight where you get the America's Mischief Mimic Veil, and that has this exact same insignia on the carpets in there. And there's also the room that leads towards the Divine Tower. It has like 4 Banished Knight statues. It also has the same type of rug going on. So this is the O'Neill. Can I rotate this? The rallying standard. It's kind of hard to make out because of like the red and whatnot. And maybe this is mirrored. Maybe it's like my camera angle. But this is the same like weird bird beast looking like thing, which is on here. So it's got like a kind of weird lion looking ahead, but it almost looks like it has like a bunch of feathers. So maybe they got their advanced copy of Final Fantasy 16, and this is like the merger of Ifrit and Phoenix. So is this it? No, not that one. So this is the room that I was talking about. The rug is down there, but it's not a good angle of it. Oh, okay, here we go. So this is the banner that I was talking about, and this is a very clear depiction of that. And yeah, okay. So why was that important? Oh yeah, so anyway, this is not likely to be a Rodan thing, so let me pull up the Sarash banner just to show you guys. Oh, this is the one that I was like originally looking for. So I think it's the next one. Nope. Yeah, I might just need to like look up Sarash. All right, one second. So anyway, my point is this depiction, I think, is very clearly not actually meant to be related to Radon. And this is more of a Banished Knight thing. And if it's a Banished Knight thing, it might also be a Sarash thing. Okay, here we go. So why do I think it's a Sarash thing more specifically? It's because this banner on the field of green is also right next to this Sarash banner. I think there's literally only one of these in the game in Stormvale, and this is the same depiction of Sarash that's on the It's not the Gilded Great Shield, but it's something like similar to it. It's like it's a golden Great Shield. I don't remember what it's called, but it's the one that you can get from fighting the Grafted Scion at the beginning of the game and killing him, or if you go back and kill it, it drops it, and it's like a Godfrey related thing. So this is supposed to depict Sarash. The lion face kind of looks similar to this, but it doesn't work anyway. But nonetheless, these two are together, and I can only assume it's for a reason, and it's curious why that is. I think it's a really strong possibility that Stormvale Castle could have been a Sarash stronghold originally, because the statue behind the throne in Stormvale has the depiction of Sarash behind Godfrey, but the Godfrey statue is actually added in front of it. So this isn't actually like part of it. It's like Sarash isn't really coming out of his back on here, despite how it might look. And underneath the throne of Stormvale, there's a depiction of a lion of Sarash. So anyway, not a Radahn thing.
Is most likely when Melania released her Scarlet Rod powers on Radahn. What I'm suggesting here is that Commander O'Neill had served Radahn and helped defend the areas in Limgrave and Weeping Peninsula, but sometime during Radahn's war against Miquella, O'Neill went to aid him in Caelid, opening an...
Oh yeah, and I should qualify that despite their banner being different, I do think O'Neill could have at least served amongst Radahn's knights and whatnot, but I don't necessarily know if he's supposed to actually be a full-on Pledge of Allegiance follower of Radahn, and the fact that he's hoisting his old standard could just show that he's like holding on to former ways which aren't relevant anymore.
Opportunity for Godric to take over the southern region. Thus, it would make sense to say that Miquella, brother of Melania and her lord, were originally tasked by Queen Marika to protect the northern region of the lands between. There is no solid proof of this other than in Castle Sol, which is in the mountaintops of the Giants. The fortified building houses Commander Niall and his spirit soldiers, which they may have served under Miquella, as he protects the secret medallion that unlocks the path to his Halic tree. The forces which Miquella had commanded might have been smaller due to the fact that in that region, the only threat that may come about would be the remnants of the giants that still wandered in that valley. But he is also assisted by other factions such as the Zamor warriors, fire monks, and thorn sorcerers. Then again, Melania and her Clean Rod knights were able to be a match against Radahn and his Redmane soldiers. And for the cherry on top,
3 branches of the Erdtree.
Marika's prosperous country cannot be perfect without its religious institutions. Theocratical governments often use religion as the basis to form laws and systems to have citizens live in line with what is correct and right based on their beliefs. The purpose is to make sure order is maintained and chaos and destruction is reduced or prevented by putting the fear of divine punishment in them. I already talked about why certain things are legal to do, while some are not in my other videos, and they are heavily tied to the religious institutions found in the Order, but they do serve some other functions as well. You'd think since we have so much information about the Golden Order, surely we know what they actually do in the churches littered around the lands between, right?
3A, Churches of the Order.
Aside from what has been mentioned earlier in regards to Marika's role, we don't have explicit confirmation on the purposes of the churches, other than a place to store the Erdtree's sacred tears, and maybe they provide some funeral services, as some of them are built with graveyards. We don't know.
And I do think that these churches being accompanied with graveyards is significant, and should be taken as evidence with a bunch of other environmental factors that these churches may have been repurposed from already established churches or chapels and whatnot, because the fact that they have graveyards but no minor Erdtrees nearby signifies to me that these weren't intended to be created with Erdtree burial in mind, and all that other stuff. And not to mention, like, the actual architecture of these things is way, way, way more ancient or more weathered than what you'd find in Langdell or most other places in the lands between.
For certain who attends and maintains the church grounds, maybe there were plenty of clergymen like Brother Corin and Goldmask who might be responsible in performing ceremonies, teaching and guiding people in the ways of the Golden Order, but we'll never know for sure since after shattering, all the churches are in ruins and disarray. We've mentioned about Two Fingers as having their
3B, vassals, preachers, and spies. Without Horn said that they also assumed the churches also did marriage because of like the Church of Vows. Yeah, I don't know, because the Church of Vows seems to be like its own special specific thing, and it has more Nox iconography than the other churches. And even that, like the Nox stuff within that church seems more recent than the church itself, I think.
Their own organization in the past. Although being part and parcel of the Golden Order, they do have other things to do for the country as well. Aside from conveying the words of the Greater Will, they are also tasked with selecting demigods to become Empyreans, essentially replacements for Marika, in the event she can no longer rule and be the bearer of the Elden Ring. What the criteria is to be chosen is unknown. The only commonality between the candidates, Rani, Melania, Mikola, and the Glowmite Queen, is that they are related to Marika in some way. The Two Fingers seem to be also responsible in spreading the teachings of the Golden Order outside the lands between via sending confessors, both as representatives of the Order but also as spies against its enemies.
And for what it's worth, the pedant in me will not let go that we don't technically know if the Glowmite Queen actually was related to Marika, or if the Glowmite Queen is related to Marika, she predates Marika. It's just kind of all one of those big Glowmite question marks.
The Fire Monks played a very minor role in the Order ever since the war against
3C, Guardians of the Flame
Giants ended, as afterwards they were only tasked to keep guard at the mountaintops to make sure no remaining giants would come for the Order, whilst keeping people away from learning the Fire Giants' incantations. Like the Two Fingers, the Fire Monks are merely another religious branch of the Order. They were trained by the Order to resist the temptations of fire and specialized themselves to fight against giants. They also seem to utilize exiled criminals called Thorn Sorcerers in their forces, perhaps suggesting that they serve as some kind of wardens as well. But alas, with time passing, most Fire Monks eventually succumbed to the allure of the Fell God's flame and used fire incantations themselves. Can't really blame them since it's a bit chilly up there. For completion's sake, we'll be also wrapping this up by touching on some remaining administrations, but since there's not much information or evidence to glean through, this will be very brief.
Scaleezy says that's not pedantry, that's just pointing out the fact that almost any statements about the GEC are assumptions. You're not wrong, but I don't know. At this point, I feel like the chat definitely knows my stances about these kind of things, so it feels a bit repetitive for me to always like stop and point that out when it does happen. But maybe it's just kind of like a good practice for anybody who may not be as familiar with my work, or maybe it's just a good practice to like remain constant and consistent. But I don't know. It slightly annoys me to leave it alone as well as address it at this point. So it can't win either way.
We know there are laws in the Golden Order and the punishments for breaking them, but who are the ones responsible in enforcing them? As talked about in my previous video, there were Inquisitors in the Order that acted as a police force that catches and interrogates the wanted. We are also aware that Praetor Rykard, basing on his title and being referred by Gideon Ofnir as a ruthless justiciar, might indicate there was some sort of court system where there were magistrates or judges deciding on criminal cases as well. And finally, with carrying out the actual sentences, the House of Murray was said to be responsible in executing criminals, according to Murray Mask and Murray's Executioner's Sword. Though we have the blessings of the Earth Tree to make sure citizens stay alive, the Order also employed perfumers as apothecaries to care for the sick and needy. Before they started spraying face-melting powders at their enemies, perfumers used their skills to produce medicine for treating people of sickness and injuries. And according
I'm going to want to think about this idea a bit more. So I don't disagree with anything that he just brought up here, but for some reason thinking of the possibility of perfumers operating before the shattering to alleviate people dying painful deaths is fascinating to me right now, because why would that station be necessary if the dead were supposed to return to the Erd Tree? I guess it could be because they didn't want the people to turn into curses and avoid returning to the Erd Tree. That'd probably be the biggest one, which might tie into the whole Omen thing and like the whole Omen coolers. That probably makes the most sense to me right now. But I kind of want to think about that a bit more, even though I think I'm on the right track. But that's kind of a little bit vain, I suppose to say. So Yada without horns and Scally, as you said, pointing out those inconsistencies is a good thing, and you guys appreciate that. Okay, I appreciate that you guys appreciate that, if I do say so myself. So I'll continue doing it, even if it does annoy me a little bit. But it's all good. I appreciate you guys letting me do that then.
According to at least one perfumer, Tricia, we know that some of them actually took care of those that were considered impure by the Order, such as the Omens and Misbegottens that we have talked about. Of course, the Lands Between is a huge world. All the tasks or jobs can't be done by just the above mentioned, so here comes the nobles, which we might have mostly ignored due to how weak and insignificant they are in the game.
Oh yeah, and when I was talking about the living jars, or not like the living jars, but the non-living jars, I also wanted to mention how these caravans are transporting coffins based off of how they're described in the Altus Plateau side of Grace, like the abandoned coffins, or abandoned coffin as it's called, but it should be coffins, most likely plural in Japanese, but not made distinct. So anyway, that just kind of reminded me that I wanted to bring this point up. So he might touch on it again here.
Like Malay Murray, Kennethite, or Godric, there could be many lords and nobles that make up the bulk of governing smaller parts of the continent, which the demigods would not be able to micromanage. Perhaps they were also responsible in doing business, collecting taxes, resolving local disputes, or slave trades. Definitely the slave trades.
Anytime taxes comes up in in relation to the lore, is a little bit triggering for me, because there's somebody who was talking about like the idea of Gwyn imposing like soul taxes on his subjects in Dark Souls, and they were like going off on like this really long tangent about it. And so pretty much whenever the topic arises, it just gives me flashbacks of that time. And that's like one of those things where it's like, sometimes a game is just a game, bro. I don't know. Yada says, off topic, but when you were playing yesterday, a troll destroyed the caravan by walking into it. You never knew that could happen. So he actually destroyed the coffin thing? I didn't know that could happen either.
Well, that's it for the Golden Order. This has been a very insightful journey looking into what FromSoft could do in terms of visually showing us a functional country and society, and finding what little we can get as evidence of it. Queen Marika strived to make a perfect world for herself and her children, but a heavy reliance on the powers of the Elden Ring to rule a country for eternity eventually caused her downfall. That said, is there a country or faction in this world where a mere mortal would have a better life? For now, I'd like to know what you think. Did you find any of the things we mentioned to be inaccurate or disagreeable? Do you think you could do better than Marika if you had her powers? Let me know down in the comments. And again, if you enjoyed this video and like to see more of what I make, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Until next time, stay hopeful, but be critical.
I like that little tag at the very end there. I appreciate that. So I think this is my first Jake Light video. I'm gonna go ahead and link it into chat for you guys as per usual. Let me actually link it. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and give it a like because I enjoyed it. Although I did have a couple of disagreements here and there, like nothing was too major. These are pretty minor stuff. Oh, this is made only 8 days ago? Interesting. Okay, let me check this out.
Have you ever?
Did they really break the Golden Order laws 5 months ago? Or maybe I watched that one? I don't remember. Oh no, I must have watched something. What seems... Oh yeah. It was what seems illegal but not within the Golden Order. That was a pretty interesting video. Okay, so not a whole lot. So maybe if they make a couple more videos, I'll subscribe, but I'll just chill for now. But nonetheless, I did enjoy the video, so I've gone ahead and linked it for you guys. The whole caravan broke and just faded away. It was really odd. You didn't get the item either? That's wild. I kind of want to test that out myself now. Special Noob says, the Elden Ring taxation reminds you of Esponia's Elden Ring skits, or was it the Undead Hunter's Elden Ring Abridged? Whichever one has Ronnie doing tax evasion. Yeah. I don't watch a lot of the meme content for the game, so I just don't know. So the caravan that broke was the one in Altus Plateau by the bridge to Mount Gelmir? Okay, yeah, I could potentially see that one. That one travels quite a distance, doesn't it? And yeah, the trolls are like on a more established patrol route. But I wonder if any of them can break at this point. Or not any, but like every one of them can break. Okay. Thanks for that info. But all right, everybody, that'll be it for tonight's stream. I think tomorrow I might not watch this one because I kind of had a couple queued up that I think would have been good for the time. But apparently I've been a poor judge of time and me reacting a lot longer than I expect. So tentatively for tomorrow, I have Abandonware should be public domain. Then Elden Ring, Explain It Like I'm 5. Crucible Knight Analysis, the strongest warrior in Elden Ring, which I didn't get to yesterday, I believe it was. And then potentially the rarest enemy in Elden Ring lore with Zeostorm. And it looks like a photo of the, what are they actually called? The Cemetery Shades, which don't feel like they'd be the rarest enemy to me, but maybe they actually are in terms of like numbers. Or maybe there's like a specific spawn in a weird spot, which I'm just not aware of. But it does make me wonder what actually is the most rare enemy. Maybe one could make an argument for those who live in death that like float up and do the weird breath attacks. I think there's like 2 to 4 of each, but I feel like there's at least 2 Cemetery Shades, if not 3, that you can fight total. So I don't know what else you would fight less than that, to be fair. You think there's only like 3 or 4 total of the Cemetery Shades? They're so odd, weird half-free skins of the Soul Flayers. The shadow things that frantically rush you? Yeah, exactly those. Watching the application of AI in the meme stuff is endlessly fascinating. Oh, okay. How about the single wizard that has the unique crown? I'm not sure what wizard you're talking about, but that reminded me of the literally singular glintstone crab within Raya Lucaria. That would take my vote for like literally the rarest one. And if not that, then maybe the poison Albinorc first gens in the surroundings of the Albinorc village, the Hammer Wizard. So there's at least 2 of those, because there's one down below before you fight the Crystallians in the one Raya Lucarian, not mine, but cave. And then there's the other one outside of Lusat's place. Or is that Azure? Azure is the one with the blue, right? Yeah. No, Azure is not blue because it's backwards. So yeah, it's Lusat, the hammer dude. And then no, there's also a third one, isn't there? Isn't there another hammer guy in the Everjail in Caelid? I think I only ever went to that one once, and you get the spirit ashes from him. One in all. Oh yeah, and then the Halig tree. Wait, is that a big dude? Because there should be two there. Anyway, definitely not a lot of cemetery shades, but I know there's only one glintstone crab. There's a wizard that has a two-faced glintstone crown variant. Oh, that you can't get as a player? No, you can get the two-faced, the twin glintstone crowns. I definitely have that. But they don't drop them. You need to get that from... I think the glintstone crab drops the twin sage helmet. Or it's a specific drop from something that's not an enemy. Elden Ring glintstone crab. Yep, it's from the crab that I'm talking about, ironically enough. According to Fextra, at least. A little bit of a caveat there. No. Not small crabs. It's one singular tiny crab that you need to do some roof parkour. So from the debate classroom, you go out and you see the Iron Maiden, you go left, you jump across like all the roofs and stuff, the roofs, and then before you go into the Church of the Cuckoo, you like jump off to the side on the outside, and next to the scaffolding there is a glintstone crab. Yeah, it's covered in crystals. The crab is so cool, you were instantly like, Crystal Lizard? Are you insane? You thought there were two of those? Maybe there's two. I distinctly remember one. So, I think, hold on, let me rephrase. I know there are two crabs total that like drop crowns or like something, but I'm confident only one is actually covered in glintstone. It's going to drive you nuts. Okay. Let's do some independent research and figure it out. All right, but that'll be it for me for tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. As always, we'll be going live again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So hopefully we'll see you then. Till then, stay safe and take care. Last Protagonist out.